Zen Buddhism, selected writings of D.T. Suzuki, read by Vincent Bagnall. Zen Buddhism presents a surface so bizarre and irrational, yet so colorful and striking, that some Westerners who approach it for the first time fail to make sense of it, while others, attracted by this surface, take it up in a purely frivolous and superficial spirit. Either response would be unfortunate. The fact is that Zen, as Dr. Suzuki demonstrates, is an essential expression of Buddhism, and Buddhism is one of the most tremendous spiritual achievements in human history. An achievement which we Westerners probably have not yet fully grasped. We have to remember how recent it is that we have sought out any knowledge of the East. Only a century separates us from Schopenhauer, the first Western philosopher who attempted a sympathetic interpretation of Buddhism, a brilliant and sensational misunderstanding on the basis of meager translations. Since then, great strides have been made in Oriental studies, but a curiously paradoxical provincialism still haunts the West. The civilization which has battered its way into every corner of the globe has been very tardy in examining its own prejudices by the wisdom of the non-Western peoples. Even today, when the slogan, "One World," is an incessant theme of Sunday journalism and television, we tend to interpret it in a purely Western sense, to mean merely that the whole planet is now bound together in the net of modern technology and communications, that the phrase may imply a necessity for coming to terms with our Eastern opposite and brother, seems to pass publicly unnoticed. There are many signs, however, that this tide must turn. I consider it a great stroke of personal good fortune to have stumbled, and quite by chance, upon the writings of D.T. Suzuki years ago. I emphasize the word personal here because I'm not a professional Orientalist, and my interest in Suzuki's writings has been what it is simply because these writings shed light upon problems in my own life. One proof that Zen does have a much-needed message for Westerners. Suzuki has steeped himself thoroughly in Chinese Buddhism, and the practical and concrete Chinese spirit probably provides an introduction to Buddhism, more congenial to the Westerner than the soaring metaphysical imagination of the Indians. I would agree with Suzuki when he holds that Zen is the living fact in all religions, East or West, or, a little more modestly, that Zen touches what is the living fact in all religions. For however small the fragment of Zen that makes live contact with a Westerner, its influence is bound to work through, and he will never be quite the same again. In the beautiful words of the Master Hoyen, when water is scooped up in the hands, the moon is reflected in them. When flowers are handled, the scent soaks into the robe. William Barrett. The sense of Zen. Zen, in its essence, is the art of seeing into the nature of one's own being, and it points the way from bondage to freedom. By making us drink right from the fountain of life, it liberates us from all the yokes under which we finite beings are usually suffering in this world. We can say that Zen liberates all the energies properly and naturally stored in each of us, which are in ordinary circumstances cramped and distorted, so that they find no adequate channel for activity. This body of ours is something like an electric battery in which a mysterious power latently lies. When this power is not properly brought into operation, it either grows moldy and withers away, or is warped and expresses itself abnormally. It is the object of Zen, therefore, to save us from going crazy or being crippled. And this is what I mean by freedom, giving free play to all the creative and benevolent impulses inherently lying in our hearts. Generally, we are blind to this fact, that we are in possession of all the necessary faculties that will make us happy and loving towards one another. All the struggles that we see around us come from this ignorance. Zen, therefore, wants us to open a third eye, as Buddhists call it, to the hitherto undreamed of region shut away from us through our own ignorance. When the cloud of ignorance disappears, the infinity of the heavens is manifested, where we see for the first time into the nature of our own being. We now know the signification of life. We know that it is not blind striving, nor is it a mere display of brutal forces, but that while we know not definitely what the ultimate purport of life is, there is something in it that makes us feel infinitely blessed in the living of it and remain quite contented with it in all its evolution without raising questions or entertaining pessimistic doubts. When we are full of vitality and not yet awakened to the knowledge of life, we cannot comprehend the seriousness of all the conflicts involved in it, which are apparently, for the moment, in a state of quiescence. But sooner or later the time will come when we have to face life squarely and solve its most perplexing and most pressing riddles. Says Confucius, "At 15, my mind was directed to study, and at 30, I knew where to stand." And this is one of the wisest sayings of the Chinese sage. Psychologists will all agree to this statement of his, for generally speaking, 15 is about the age youth begins to look around seriously and inquire into the meaning of life. All the spiritual powers until now securely hidden in the subconscious part of the mind break out almost simultaneously. And when this breaking out is too precipitous and violent, the mind may lose its balance more or less permanently. In fact, so many cases of nervous prostration reported during adolescence are chiefly due to this loss of the mental equilibrium. In most cases, the effect is not very grave and the crisis may pass without leaving deep marks. But in some characters, either through their inherent tendencies or on account of the influence of environment among their plastic constitution, the spiritual awakening stirs them up to the very depths of their personality. This is the time you will be asked to choose between the everlasting no and the everlasting yea. This choosing is what Confucius means by study. It is not studying the classics, but deeply delving into the mysteries of life. Normally the outcome of the struggle is the everlasting yea, or let thy will be done. For life is, after all, a form of affirmation, however negatively it might be conceived by the pessimists. But we cannot deny the fact that there are many things in this world which will turn our too sensitive minds towards the other direction and make us exclaim with Andreyev in The Life of Man, "I curse everything that you have given. I curse the day in which I was born. I curse the day on which I shall die. I curse the whole of my life. I fling everything back at our cruel face, senseless fate. Be accursed, be forever accursed. With my curses I conquer you. What else can you do to me? With my last thought I will shout into your asinine ears, be accursed, be accursed." Now, this is a terrible indictment of life. It is a complete negation of life. It is a most dismal picture of the destiny of man on earth. leaving no trace is quite true, for we know nothing of our future except that we all pass away, including the very earth from which we have come. There are certainly things justifying pessimism. Life, as most of us live it, is suffering. There is no denying the fact. As long as life is a form of struggle, it cannot be anything but pain. Does not a struggle mean the impact of two conflicting forces, each trying to get the upper hand of the other? If the battle is lost, the outcome is death, and death is the fearsomest thing in the world. Even when death is conquered, one is left alone, and the loneliness is sometimes more unbearable than the struggle itself. One may not be conscious of all this and may go on indulging in those momentary pleasures that are afforded by the senses. But this being unconscious does not in the least alter the facts of life. However insistently the blind may deny the existence of the sun, they cannot annihilate it. The tropical heat will mercilessly scorch them, and if they do not take the proper care, they will all be wiped away from the surface of the earth. The Buddha was perfectly right when he pronounced his fourfold noble truth, the first of which is that life is pain. Did not every one of us come to this world screaming, in a way, protesting? To come out into cold and prohibitive surroundings after a soft, warm, motherly womb was surely a painful incident, to say the least. Growth is always attended with pain. Teething is more or less a painful process. Puberty is usually accompanied by a mental as well as a physical disturbance. The growth of the organism called society is also marked with painful cataclysms, and we are at present witnessing one of its birth throes. We may calmly reason and say that this is all inevitable, that inasmuch as every reconstruction means the destruction of the old regime, we cannot help going through a painful operation. But this cold, intellectual analysis does not alleviate whatever harrowing feelings we have to undergo. The pain heartlessly inflicted on our nerves is ineradicable. Life is, after all, arguing a painful struggle. This, however, is providential, for the more you suffer, the deeper grows your character. And with the deepening of your character, you read the more penetratingly into the secrets of life. All great artists, all great leaders, and all great social reformers have come out of the intensest struggles, which they fought bravely, quite frequently in tears, and with bleeding hearts. Unless you eat your bread in sorrow, you cannot taste of real life. Mencius is right when he says that when heaven wants to perfect a great man, it tries him in every possible way until he comes out triumphantly from all his painful experiences. To me, Oscar Wilde seems always posing or striving for an effect. He may be a great artist, but there's something in him that turns me away from him. Yet he exclaims in his De Profundis, "During the last few months I have, after terrible difficulties and struggles, been able to comprehend some of the lessons hidden in the heart of pain." Clergymen and people who use phrases without wisdom sometimes talk of suffering as a mystery. It is really a revelation. One discerns things one never discerned before. One approaches the whole of history from a different standpoint. You will observe here what sanctifying effects his prison life produced on his character. If he had had to go through a similar trial in the beginning of his career, he might have been able to produce far greater works than those we have of him at present. We are ego-centered. The ego shell in which we live is the hardest thing to outgrow. We seem to carry it all the time from childhood up to the time we finally pass away. We are, however, given many chances to break through this shell, and the first and greatest of them is when we reach adolescence. This is the first time the ego really comes to recognize the other. I mean the awakening of sexual love. An ego entire and undivided, now begins to feel a sort of split in itself. Love, hitherto dormant deep in his heart, lifts its head and causes a great commotion in it. For the love now stirred demands at once the assertion of the ego and its annihilation. Love makes the ego lose itself in the object it loves, and yet at the same time it wants to have the object as its own. This is a contradiction and a great tragedy of life. This elemental feeling must be one of the divine agencies whereby man is urged to advance in his upward walk. God gives tragedies to perfect man. The greatest bulk of literature ever produced in this world is but the harping on the same string of love, and we never seem to grow weary of it. But this is not the topic we are concerned with here. What I want to emphasize is this connection in this, that through the awakening of love, we get a glimpse into the infinity of things, and that this glimpse urges youth to romanticism or to rationalism according to his temperament and environment and education. When the ego shell is broken and the other is taken into its own body, we can say that the ego has denied itself or that the ego has taken its first steps toward the infinite. Religiously, here ensues an intense struggle between the finite and the infinite or infinite, between the intellect and a higher power, or more plainly, between the flesh and the spirit. This is the problem of problems that has driven away many a youth into the hands of Satan. When a grown-up man looks back to these youthful days, he cannot but feel a sort of shudder going through his entire frame. The struggle to be fought in sincerity may go on up to the age of 30, when Confucius states that he knew where to stand. The religious consciousness is now fully awakened, and all the possible ways of escaping from the struggle or bringing it to an end are most earnestly sought in every direction. Books are read, lectures are attended, sermons are greedily taken in, and various religious exercises or disciplines are tried, and naturally Zen too comes to be inquired into. How does Zen solve the problem of problems? In the first place, Zen proposes its solution by directly appealing to facts of personal experience and not to book knowledge. The nature of one's own being, where apparently rages the struggle between the finite and the infinite, is to be grasped by a higher faculty than the intellect. For Zen says, it is the latter that first made us raise the question which it could not answer by itself, and that therefore it is to be put aside to make room for something higher and more enlightening. For the intellect has a peculiarly disquieting quality in it. Though it raises questions enough to disturb the serenity of the mind, it is too frequently unable to give satisfactory answers to them. It upsets the blissful peace of ignorance, and yet it does not restore the former state of things by offering something else. Because it points out ignorance, it is often considered illuminating, whereas the fact is that it disturbs, not necessarily always bringing light on its path. It is not final. It waits for something higher than itself for the solution of all the questions it will raise, regardless of consequences. If it were able to bring a new order into the disturbance and settle it once for all, there would have been no need for philosophy after it had been first systematized by a great thinker, by an Aristotle or by a Hegel. But the history of thought proves that each new structure raised by a man of extraordinary intellect is sure to be pulled down by the succeeding ones. And this constant pulling down and building up is all right as far as philosophy itself is concerned, for the inherent nature of the intellect, as I take it, demands it, and we cannot put a stop to the progress of philosophical inquiries any more than to our breathing. But when it comes to the question of life itself, we cannot wait for the ultimate solution to be offered by the intellect, even if it could do so. We cannot suspend, even for a moment, our life activity for philosophy to unravel its mysteries. Let the mysteries remain as they are. But live we must. The hungry cannot wait until a complete analysis of food is obtained and the nourishing value of each element is determined. For the dead, the scientific knowledge of food will be of no use whatever. Zen, therefore, does not rely on the intellect for the solution of its deepest problems. By personal experience, it is meant to get at the fact at first hand, and not through any intermediary, whatever this may be. Its favorite analogy is to point at the moon a finger is needed, but woe to those who take the finger for the moon. A basket is welcome to carry our fish home, but when the fish are safely on the table, why should we eternally bother ourselves with the basket? Here stands the fact, and let us grasp it with the naked hands, lest it should slip away. This is what Zen proposes to do. As nature abhors a vacuum, Zen abhors anything coming between the fact and ourselves. According to Zen, there is no struggle in the fact itself, such as between the finite and the infinite, between the flesh and the spirit. These are idle distinctions, fictitiously designed by the intellect for its own interest. And those who take them too seriously, or those who try to read them into the very fact of life, are those who take the finger for the moon. When we are hungry, we eat. When we are sleepy, we lay ourselves down. And where does the infinite or the finite come in here? Are not we complete in ourselves and each in himself? Life as it is lived suffices. It is only when the disquieting intellect steps in and tries to murder it that we stop to live and imagine ourselves to be short of or in something. Let the intellect alone. It has its usefulness in its proper sphere, but let it not interfere with the flowing of the life stream. If you are at all tempted to look into it, do so while letting it flow. The fact of flowing must under no circumstances be arrested or meddled with. For the moment your hands are dipped into, its transparency is disturbed. It ceases to reflect your image, which you have had from the very beginning and will continue to have to the end of time. Almost corresponding to the four maxims of the Nichiren sect, Zen has its own four statements. A special transmission outside the scriptures, no dependence upon words and letters, direct pointing to the soul of man, seeing into one's nature and the attainment of Buddhahood. This sums up all that is claimed by Zen as religion. Of course, we must not forget that there is a historical background to this bold pronunciamento. At the time of the introduction of Zen into China, most of the Buddhists were addicted to the discussion of highly metaphysical questions, or satisfied with the merely observing of the ethical precepts laid down by the Buddha, or with the leading of a lethargic life entirely absorbed in the contemplation of the evanescence of things worldly. They all missed apprehending the great fact of life itself, which flows altogether outside of these vain exercises of the intellect or of the imagination. Bodhidharma and his successors recognized this pitiful state of affairs, hence their proclamation of the four great statements of Zen. In a word, they mean that Zen has its own way of pointing to the nature of one's own being, and that when this is done, one attains to Buddhahood, in which all the contradictions and disturbances caused by the intellect are entirely harmonized in a unity of higher order. For this reason, Zen never explains, but indicates. It does not appeal to circumlocution, nor does it generalize. It always deals with facts, concrete and tangible. Logically considered, Zen may be full of contradictions and repetitions, but as it stands above all things, it goes serenely on its own way. As the Zen master aptly puts it, carrying his homemade cane on the shoulder, he goes right on among the mountains, one rising above another. It does not challenge logic, it simply walks its path of facts, leaving all the rest to their own fates. It is only when logic, neglecting its proper function, tries to step into the track of Zen that it loudly proclaims its principles and forcibly drives out the intruder. Zen is not an enemy of anything. There is no reason why it should antagonize the intellect, which may sometimes be utilized for the cause of Zen itself. To show some examples of Zen's direct dealing with the fundamental facts of existence, the following are selected. Rinzai, Lin Chi, once delivered a sermon saying, "Over a mass of reddish flesh there sits a true man who has no title. He is all the time coming in and out from your sense organs. If you have not yet testified to the fact, look, look." A monk came forward and asked, "Who is this true man of no title?" Rinzai came down from his straw chair, and taking hold of the monk, exclaimed, "Speak, speak." The monk remained irresolute, not knowing what to say, whereupon the master, letting him go, remarked, "What worthless stuff is this true man of no title?" Rinzai then went straight back to his room. Rinzai was noted for his rough and direct treatment of his disciples. He never liked those roundabout dealings which generally characterized the methods of a lukewarm master. He must have got this directness from his own teacher Obaku, Huang Ni, by whom he was struck 3 times for asking what the fundamental principle of Buddhism was. It goes without saying that Zen has nothing to do with mere striking or roughly shaking the questioner. If you take this as constituting the essentials of Zen, you would commit the same gross error as one who took the finger for the moon, as in everything else. But most particularly in Zen, all its outward manifestations or demonstrations must never be regarded as final. They just indicate the way where to look for the facts. Therefore, these indicators are important. We cannot do well without them. But once caught in them, which are like entangling meshes, we are doomed. For Zen can never be comprehended. Some may think Zen is always trying to catch you in the net of logic or by the snare of words. If you once slip your steps, you are bound for eternal damnation. You will never get to freedom, for which your hearts are so burning. Therefore Rinzai grasps with his naked hands what is directly presented to us all. If a third eye of ours is opened, undimmed, we shall know in a most unmistakable manner where Rinzai is driving us. We have first of all to get into the very spirit of the master and interview the inner man right there. No amount of 40 explanations will ever lead us into the nature of our own selves. The more you explain, the further it runs away from you. It is like trying to get hold of your own shadow. You run after it and it runs with you at the identical rate of speed. When you realize it, you read deep into the spirit of Rinzai or Obaku, and their real kind-heartedness will begin to be appreciated. When the truth-seeking monk was allowed to go inside the gate, the master took hold of him by the chest and demanded, "Speak! Speak!" Uman hesitated, whereupon the master pushed him out of the gate, saying, "Oh, you good-for-nothing fellow!" While the gate was hastily shut, one of Uman's legs was caught and broken. The intense pain resulting from this apparently awakened the poor fellow to the greatest fact of life. He was no more a solicitous, pity-begging monk. The realization now gained paid more than enough for the loss of his leg. He was not, however, a solitary instance in this respect. There were many such in the history of Zen who were willing to sacrifice a part of the body for the truth. Says Confucius, "If a man understands the Tao in the morning, it is well with him even when he dies in the evening." Some would feel indeed that truth is of more value than mere living, mere vegetative or animal living. But in the world, alas, there are so many living corpses wallowing in the mud of ignorance and sensuality. This is where Zen is most difficult to understand. Why this sarcastic vituperation? Why this seeming heartlessness? What fault had Uman to deserve the loss of his leg? He was a poor, truth-seeking monk, earnestly anxious to get enlightenment from the master. Was it really necessary for the latter, from his way of understanding Zen, to shut him out 3 times? And when the gate was half opened, to close it again so violently, so inhumanly? Was this the truth of Buddhism Uman was so eager to get? But the outcome of all this singularly was what was desired by both of them. As to the master, he was satisfied to see the disciple attain an insight into the secrets of his being. And as regards the disciple, he was most grateful for all that was done to him. Evidently, Zen is the most irrational, inconceivable thing in the world. And this is why I said before that Zen was not subject to logical analysis or to intellectual treatment. It must be directly and personally experienced by each of us in his inner spirit. Just as 2 stainless mirrors reflect each other, the fact and our own spirits must stand facing each other with no intervening agents. When this is done, we are able to seize upon the living, pulsating fact itself. Freedom is an empty word until then. The first object was to escape the bondage in which all finite beings find themselves. But if we do not cut asunder the very chain of ignorance with which we are bound, hands and feet, where shall we look for deliverance? And this chain of ignorance is wrought of nothing else but the intellect and sensuous infatuation, which cling tightly to every thought we may have, to every feeling we may entertain. They are hard to get rid of. They are like wet clothes, as is aptly expressed by the Zen masters. We are born free and equal, whatever this may mean socially or politically. Zen maintains that it is absolutely true in the spiritual domain, and that all the fetters and manacles we seem to be carrying about ourselves are put on later through ignorance of the true condition of existence. all the treatments, sometimes literary and sometimes physical, which are most liberally and kind-heartedly given by the masters to inquiring souls, are intended to get them back to the original state of freedom. And this is never really realized until we once personally experience it through our own efforts, independent of any representation. The ultimate standpoint of Zen, therefore, is that we have been led astray through ignorance to find a split in our own being, that there was from the very beginning no need for a struggle between the finite and the infinite, that the peace we are seeking so eagerly after has been there all the time. Sotoba, Su Tungpo, the noted Chinese poet and statesman, expresses the idea in the following verse. Misty rain on Mount Lu, and waves surging in Chi Chiang. When you have not yet been there, many a regret surely you have. But once there, and homeward you wend, how matter-of-fact things look, misty rain on Mount Lu, and waves surging in Chia Chang. This is what is also asserted by Sijin Ishin, Qingyuan Weixin, according to whom, before a man studies Zen, to him mountains are mountains and waters are waters. After he gets an insight into the truth of Zen, through the instruction of a good master, mountains to him are not mountains and waters are not waters. But after this, when he really attains to the abode of rest, mountains are once more mountains, and waters are waters. Bokuju Muchao, who lived in the latter half of the 9th century, was once asked, "We have to dress and eat every day, and how can we escape from all that?" The master replied, "We dress, we eat. I do not understand you," said the questioner. "If you don't understand, put your dress on and eat your food." Zen always deals in concrete facts and does not indulge in generalization, and I do not wish to add any unnecessary legs to the painted snake, but if I try to waste my philosophical comments on Bokuju, I may say this. We are all finite. We cannot live out of time and space. Inasmuch as we are earth created, there is no way to grasp the infinite. How can we deliver ourselves from the limitations of existence? This is perhaps the idea put in the first question of the monk, to which the master replies, "Salvation must be sought in the finite itself. There is nothing infinite apart from finite things. If you seek something transcendental that will cut you off from this world of relativity, which is the same thing as the annihilation of yourself, you do not want salvation at the cost of your own existence. If so, drink and eat and find your way of freedom in this drinking and eating." This was too much for the questioner, who therefore confessed himself as not understanding the meaning of the master. Therefore the latter continued, "Whether you understand or not, just the same, go on living in the finite, with the finite. For you die if you stop eating and keeping yourself warm on account of your aspiration for the infinite. No matter how you struggle, nirvana is to be sought in the midst of samsara, birth and death. Whether an enlightened Zen master or an ignoramus of the first degree, neither can escape the so-called laws of nature. When the stomach is empty, both are hungry. When it snows, both have to put on an extra flannel. I do not, however, mean that they are both material existences, but they are what they are, regardless of their conditions of spiritual development. As the Buddhist scriptures have it, the darkness of the cave itself turns into enlightenment when a torch of spiritual insight burns. It is not that a thing called darkness is first taken out, and another thing known by the name of enlightenment is carried in later, but that enlightenment and darkness are substantially one and the same thing from the very beginning. The change from the one to the other has taken place only inwardly or subjectively. Therefore, the finite is the infinite and vice versa. These are not two separate things, though we are compelled to conceive them so intellectually. This is the idea logically interpreted, perhaps contained in Bokuju's answer given to the monk. The mistake consists in our splitting into two. What is really and absolutely one? Is not life one as we live it, which we cut to pieces by recklessly applying the murderous knife of intellectual surgery? On being requested by the monks to deliver a sermon, Hyakujo Nihan told them to work on the farm, after which he would give them a talk on the great subject of Buddhism. They did as they were told and came to the master for a sermon, when the latter, without saying a word, merely extended his open arms towards the monks. Perhaps there is, after all, nothing mysterious in Zen. Everything is open to your full view. If you eat your food and keep yourself cleanly dressed and work on the farm to raise your rice or vegetables, you are doing all that is required of you on this earth, and the infinite is realized in you. How realized? When Bokuju was asked what Zen was, he recited a Sanskrit phrase from a sutra, Mahaprajna Paramita. The inquirer acknowledged his inability to understand the purport of the strange phrase, and the master put a comment on it, saying, "My robe is all worn out after so many years' usage, and parts of it in shreds, loosely hanging, have been blown away to the clouds." Is the infinite, after all, such a poverty-stricken mendicant? A contentment gleaned from idleness or from laissez-faire attitude of mind is a thing most to be abhorred. There is no Zen in this, but sloth and mere vegetation. The battle must rage in its full vigor and masculinity. Without it, whatever peace that obtains has no deep foundation. The first storm it may encounter will crush it to the ground. Zen is quite emphatic in this. Certainly the moral virility to be found in Zen, apart from its mystic flight, comes from the fighting of the battle of life courageously and undauntedly. From the ethical point of view, Zen may be considered a discipline aiming at the reconstruction of character. Our ordinary life only touches the fringe of personality. It does not cause a commotion in the deepest parts of the soul. Even when the religious consciousness is awakened, most of us lightly pass over it so as to leave no marks of a bitter fighting on the soul. We are thus made to live on the superficiality of things. We may be clever, bright, and all that, but what we produce lacks depth, sincerity, and does not appeal to the inmost feelings. Some are utterly unable to create anything except makeshifts or imitations, betraying their shallowness of character and want of spiritual experience. While Zen is primarily religious, it also molds our moral character. It may be better to say that a deep spiritual experience is bound to affect a change in the moral structure of one's personality. How is this so? The truth of Zen is such that when we want to comprehend it penetratingly, we have to go through with a great struggle, sometimes very long and exacting constant vigilance. To be disciplined in Zen is no easy task. A Zen master once remarked that the life of a monk can be attained only by a man of great moral strength, and that even a minister of the state cannot expect to become a successful monk. Let us remark here that in China, to be a minister of the state, was considered to be the greatest achievement a man could ever hope for in this world. Not that a monkish life requires the austere practice of asceticism, but that it implies the elevation of one's spiritual powers to their highest notch. And all the utterances or activities of the great Zen masters have come from this evaluation. They are not intended to be enigmatic or driving us to confusion. They are the overflowing of a soul filled with deep experiences. Therefore, unless we are ourselves elevated to the same height as the masters, we cannot gain the same commanding views of life. Says Ruskin, and be sure also, if the author is worth anything, that you will not get at his meaning all at once. Nay, that as his whole meaning you will not for a long time arrive in any wise. Not that he does not say what he means, and in strong words too, but he cannot say it all, and what is more strange, will not, but in a hidden way and in parable, in order that he may be sure you want it. I cannot see quite the reason of this, nor analyze that cruel reticence in the breasts of wise men which makes them always hide their deeper thought. They do not give it to you by way of help, but of reward, and will make themselves sure that you deserve it before they allow you to reach it. And this key to the royal treasury of wisdom is given us only after patient and painful moral struggle. The mind is ordinarily chock full with all kinds of intellectual nonsense and passional rubbish. They are, of course, useful in their own ways in our daily life. There's no denying that. But it is chiefly because of these accumulations that we are made miserable and groan under the feeling of bondage. Each time we want to make a movement, they fetter us, they choke us, and cast a heavy veil over our spiritual horizon. We feel as if we are constantly living under restraint. We long for naturalness and freedom, yet we do not seem to attain them. The Zen masters know this, for they have gone through with the same experiences once. They want to have us get rid of all these wearisome burdens, which we really do not have to carry in order to live a life of truth and enlightenment. Thus they utter a few words and demonstrate with action that, when rightly comprehended, will deliver us from the oppression and tyranny of these intellectual accumulations. But the comprehension does not come to us so easily. Being so long accustomed to the oppression, the mental inertia becomes hard to remove. In fact, it has gone down deep into the roots of our own being, and the whole structure of personality is to be overturned. The process of reconstruction is stained with tears and blood. But the height the great masters have climbed cannot otherwise be reached. The truth of Zen can never be attained unless it is attacked with the full force of personality. The passage is strewn with thistles and brambles, and the climb is slippery in the extreme. It is no pastime, but the most serious task in life. No idlers will ever dare attempt it. It is indeed a moral anvil on which your character is hammered and hammered. To the question, what is Zen? A master gave this answer: boiling oil over a blazing fire. This scorching experience we have to go through with before Zen smiles on us and says, here is your home. Zen in relation to Buddhism generally. Superficially, indeed, there's something in Zen so bizarre and even irrational as to frighten the pious literary followers of the so-called primitive Buddhism, and to make them declare that Zen is not Buddhism, but a Chinese anomaly of it. What, for instance, would they really make out of such statements as follows? In the sayings of Nan Chuan, we read that when Tsui, governor of Chai district, asked the fifth patriarch of the Zen sect, that is, Hongzhen, how it was that while he had 500 followers, Huineng, in preference to all others, was singled out to be given the orthodox robe of transmission as the sixth patriarch. The fifth patriarch replied, 499 out of my disciples understand well what Buddhism is, except one Huineng. He is a man not to be measured by an ordinary standard. Hence the robe of faith was handed over to him. In the age of void, there are no words whatever. As soon as the Buddha appears on earth, words come into existence, hence our clinging to signs. And thus, as we now so firmly take hold of words, we limit ourselves in various ways, while in the great way, there are absolutely no such things as ignorance or holiness. Everything that has a name thereby limits itself. Therefore, the old master of Chiangxi declared that it is neither mind, nor Buddha, nor a thing. It was in this way that he wished to guide his followers, while these days they vainly endeavor to experience the great way by hypostasizing such an entity as mind. If the way could be mastered in this manner, it would be well for them to wait until the appearance of Maitreya Buddha, which is said to be at the end of the world, and then to awaken the Enlightenment thought. How could such ones ever hope for spiritual freedom? Under the fifth patriarch, all of his 500 disciples, except one Huineng, understood Buddhism well. The lay disciple, Neng, was quite unique in this respect, for he did not at all understand Buddhism. He understood the way only, and no other thing. These are not very extraordinary statements in the Zen, but to most of the Zen critics, they must spell abomination. Buddhism is flatly denied, and its knowledge is regarded not to be indispensable to the mastery of Zen, the great way, which, on the contrary, is more or less identified with the negation of Buddhism. How is this? To make this point clear, and to justify the claim for Zen that it transmits the essence of Buddhism and not its formulated articles of faith, as are recorded in letters, it is necessary to strip the spirit of Buddhism of all its outer casings and appendages, which, hindering the working of its original life force, are apt to make us take the unessential for the essential. We know that the acorn is so different from the oak, but as long as there is continuation of growth, their identity is a logical conclusion. To see really into the nature of the acorn is to trace an uninterrupted development through its various historical stages. When the seed remains a seed and means nothing more, there is no life in it. It is a finished piece of work, and except as an object of historical curiosity, it has no value whatever in our religious experience. In like manner, to determine the nature of Buddhism, we must go along its whole line of development and see what are the healthiest and most vital germs in it, which have brought it to the present state of maturity. When this is done, we shall see in what manner Zen is to be recognized as one of the various phases of Buddhism. The constitution of any existent religion that has a long history, it is very advisable to comprehend this constitution, to separate its founder from his teaching as a most powerful determinant in the development of the latter. And by this I mean, in the first place, that the founder, so-called, had in the beginning no idea of being the founder of any religious system which would later grow up in his name. In the second, that to his disciples, while he was yet alive, his personality was not regarded as independent of his teaching, at least as far as they were conscious of the fact. In the third, that what was unconsciously working in their minds as regards the nature of their master's personality came out in the foreground after his passing with all the possible intensity that had been latently gaining strength within them. And lastly, that the personality of the founder grew up in his disciples' minds so powerful as to make itself the very nucleus of his teaching. That is to say, the latter was made to serve as explanation of the meaning of the former. Zen, in spite of the uncouthness and extraordinariness of its outward features, belongs to the general system of Buddhism. And by Buddhism we mean not only the teaching of the Buddha himself as recorded in the earliest agamas, but the later speculations, philosophical and religious, concerning the person and life of the Buddha. His personal greatness was such as occasionally made his disciples advance theories somewhat contrary to the advice supposed to have been given by their master. This was inevitable. The world, with all its contents individually as well as a whole, is subject to our subjective interpretation, not a capricious interpretation indeed, but growing out of our inner necessity, our religious yearnings. The Buddha's enlightenment and nirvana were two separate ideas in his life as it unfolded in history so many centuries ago. But from the religious point of view, they are to be regarded as one idea. That is to say, to understand the content and the value of enlightenment is the same as realizing the signification of nirvana. Taking a stand on this, the Mahayanists developed two currents of thought. The one was to rely on our intellectual efforts to the furthest extent they could reach, and the other pursuing the practical method adopted by the Buddha himself. Indeed, by all Indian truth-seekers, endeavor to find in the practice of Hayana something directly leading to enlightenment. So it goes without saying that in both of these efforts the original impulse lies in the inmost religious consciousness of pious Buddhists. The truth has many avenues of approach through which it makes itself known to the human mind, but the choice it makes depends on certain limitations under which it works. The superabundance of Indian imagination issued in supernaturalism and wonderful symbolism, and the Chinese sense of practicalness and its love for the solid everyday facts of life, resulted in Zen Buddhism. We may now be able to understand, though only tentatively by most readers at present, the following definitions of Zen offered by its masters. When Joshu was asked what Zen was, he answered, "It is cloudy today, and I won't answer." To the same question, Uman's reply was, "That's it." On another occasion, the master was not at all affirmative, for he said, "Not a word to be predicated." These being some of the definitions given to Zen by the masters, in what relationship did they conceive of Zen as standing to the doctrine of enlightenment taught in the sutras? Did they conceive it after the manner of the Lankavatara, or after that of the Prajnaparamita? No, Zen had to have its own way. The Chinese mind refused blindly to follow the Indian models. If this is still to be contested, read the following, and here. A monk asked Khan, Chien, who lived in Harayo, Paling, "Is there any difference between the teaching of the patriarch and that of the sutras, or not?" Said the master, "When the cold weather comes, the fowl flies up in the trees while the wild duck goes down into the river." Hoyen, or Fayen, of Gozazan, commented on this, saying, "The great teacher of Peiling has expressed only half of the truth. I would not have it so. Mine is, when water is scooped in the hands, the moon is reflected in them. When the flowers are handled, the scent soaks into the robe." The history of Zen. The legendary story of the origin of Zen in India runs as follows. Sakyamuni was once engaged at the Mount of the Holy Vulture in preaching to a congregation of his disciples. He did not resort to any lengthy verbal discourse to explain his point, but simply lifted a bouquet of flowers before the assemblage, which was presented to him by one of his lay disciples. Not a word came out of his mouth. Nobody understood the meaning of this except the old venerable Mahakasyapa, who quietly smiled at the master, as if he fully comprehended the purport of this silent but eloquent teaching on the part of the enlightened one. The latter, perceiving this, opened his golden-tongued mouth and proclaimed solemnly, "I have the most precious treasure, spiritual and transcendental, which this moment I hand over to you, O Venerable Mahakasyapa." Orthodox Zen followers generally blindly take this incident to be the origin of their doctrine, in which, according to them, is disclosed the inmost mind of the Buddha, as well as the secret of the religion, as Zen claims to be the inmost essence of Buddhism, and to have been directly transmitted by the Buddha to his greatest disciple, Mahakasyapa. Its followers naturally look for the particular occasion when this transmission took place between the master and the disciple. We know in a general way that Mahakasyapa succeeded the Buddha as the leader of the faith. But as to his special transmission of Zen, we have no historical records in the Indian Buddhist writings at present in our possession. From the modern critical point of view, it did not matter very much whether Zen originated with Bodhidharma in China or with the Buddha in India, inasmuch as Zen is true and has an enduring value. And again, from the historian's point of view, which tries scientifically to ascertain the source of development resulting in Zen Buddhism, it is only important to find a logical connection between the Mahayana doctrine of enlightenment in India and its practical application by the Chinese to the actualities of life. And as to any special line of transmission in India before Bodhidharma, as was established by the Zen devotees, it is not a matter of much concern nor of great importance. But as soon as Zen is formulated into an independent system, not only with its characteristic features, but with its historical ascertainable facts, it will be necessary for the historians to trace its line of transmission complete and not interrupted. For in Zen, as we shall see, it is of the utmost importance for its followers to be truly certified or approved by the master as to the genuineness or orthodox character of their realization. As long as Zen is the product of the Chinese soil, from the Indian seed of enlightenment, no special line of transmission need be established in India unless it is in a general logical manner. The history of Zen dates with the coming of the Bodhidharma from the West, AD 520. He came to China with a special message, which is summed up in the following lines. A special transmission outside the scriptures, no dependence upon words and letters, direct pointing at the soul of man, and seeing into one's nature and the attainment of Buddhahood. And these 4 lines, as describing the principles of Zen teaching as distinguished from other schools of Buddhism, already in existence in China, were formulated later and not by Dharma himself. We cannot exactly tell who was the real author or have no definite information on the subject. Our knowledge of the life of Bodhidharma comes from 2 sources. One, which is the earliest record we have, by Tao Xuan in his biographies of the high priests, which was compiled early in the Tang dynasty, AD 645. The author was the founder of a Vinaya sect in China, and a learned scholar who, however, was living before the movement of the new school to be known as Zen came into maturity under Hui Neng, the 6th patriarch, who was 9 years old when Tao Xuan wrote his biographies. The other source is the records of the transmission of the lamp, AD 1004, compiled by Tao Yuan early in the Sung dynasty. And this was written by a Zen monk after Zen had received full recognition as a special branch of Buddhism and contains sayings and doings of its masters. The author often refers to some earlier Zen histories as his authorities, which are, however, lost now, being known by the titles only. Dhyana, in essence, is birthless, without attaching yourself to the thought of birth and death. Think in dhyana. Have your mind like unto space, and yet have no thought of space. Thus, learning of the sixth patriarch's view on samadhi or dhyana, Chi Huang came to a master himself and asked to be further enlightened, and said the patriarch, "What Zhuangzi told you is true. Have your mind like unto space, and yet entertain it in no thought of emptiness. And then the truth will have its full activity unimpeded. Every moment of yours will come out of an innocent heart, and the ignorant and the wise will have an equal treatment in your hands. Subject and object will lose their distinction, and essence and appearance will be of one suchness. When a world of absolute oneness is thus realized, you have attained to eternal samadhi." To make the position of the sixth patriarch on the subject of meditation still clearer and more definite, let me quote another incident from his platform sutra. A monk once made reference to a gatha composed by Wo Luan, which read as follows: "I, Wo Luan, know a device whereby to blot out all my thoughts. The objective world no more stirs the mind, and daily matures my enlightenment." Hearing this, the sixth patriarch remarked, "That is no enlightenment, but leads one into a state of bondage. Listen to my gatha. I, Hui Neng, know no device. My thoughts are not suppressed. The objective world ever stirs the mind. And what is the use of maturing enlightenment?" These will be sufficient to show that Hui Neng, the sixth patriarch, was, on the one hand, no quietist, nor nihilist advocating the doctrine of absolute emptiness, while on the other hand, he was no idealist either, in the sense of denying an objective world. His dhyana was full of action, yet above a world of particulars, so long as it was not carried away by it and in it. Hui Neng's method of demonstrating the truth of Zen was purely Chinese, not Indian. He did not resort to abstract terminology nor to romantic mysticism. The method was direct, plain, concrete, and highly practical. When the monk Ming came to him and asked for instruction, he said, "Show me your original face before you were born." Is not the statement quite to the point? No philosophic discourse, no elaborate reasoning, no mystic imagery, but a direct, unequivocal dictum. In this, the sixth patriarch cut the first turf, and his disciples quickly and efficiently followed in his steps. According to Hui Neng's doctrine, non-doing is reality. Emptiness is the truth. And the ultimate meaning of things is vast and immovable. He taught that human nature in its beginning, as well as in the end, is thoroughly good and does not require any artificial weeding out, for it has its root in that which is serene. The Emperor Cheng Cuang heard of him and sent his courtier twice asking him to appear at court, but failed to get him out. So the emperor had his words instead, which he took for his spiritual guidance. The teaching of the sixth patriarch in detail is generally accessible today. All those who talk at all about Zen find their source of information in Cao Qi. After Hui Neng, Zen was split up into several schools, two of which have survived even down to this day, in China as well as in Japan, though much modified in various aspects. The principle and spirit of Zen Buddhism is still alive, as it was in the days of the sixth patriarch, and as one of the great spiritual heritages of the East. It is still wielding its unique influence, especially among the cultured people in Japan. satori, or enlightenment. The essence of Zen Buddhism consists in acquiring a new viewpoint on life and things generally, and by this I mean that if we want to get into the inmost life of Zen, we must forego all our ordinary habits of thinking which control our everyday life. We must try to see if there is any other way of judging things, or rather if our ordinary way is always sufficient to give us the ultimate satisfaction of our spiritual needs. If we feel dissatisfied somehow with this life, if there is something in our ordinary way of living that deprives us of freedom in its most sanctified sense, we must endeavor to find a way somewhere which gives us a sense of finality and contentment. Zen proposes to do this for us and assures us of the acquirement of a new point of view in which life assumes a fresher, deeper, and more satisfying aspect. This acquirement, however, is really and naturally the greatest mental cataclysm one can go through within life. It's no easy task. It is a kind of fiery baptism, and one has to go through the storm, the earthquake, the overthrowing of the mountains, and the breaking in pieces of the rocks. This acquiring of a new point of view in our dealings with life and the world is popularly called by Japanese Zen students satori, Wu in Chinese. It is really another name for enlightenment, which is the word used by the Buddha and his Indian followers ever since his realization under the Bodhi tree by the river Naranjana. There are several other phases in Chinese designating this spiritual experience, each of which has a special connotation, showing tentatively how this phenomenon is interpreted. At all events, there is no Zen without satori, which is indeed the alpha and omega of Zen Buddhism. Zen devoid of satori is like a sun without its light and heat. Zen may lose all its literature, all its monasteries, and all its paraphernalia, but as long as there is satori in it, it will survive to eternity. I want to emphasize this most fundamental fact concerning the very life of Zen, for there are some, even among the students of Zen themselves, who are blind to this central fact and are apt to think when Zen has been explained away logically or psychologically, or as one of the Buddhist philosophies, which can be summed up by using highly technical and conceptual Buddhist phrases, Zen is exhausted. And there remains nothing in it that makes it what it is. But my contention is the life of Zen begins with the opening of satori, kai wu in Chinese. Satori may be defined as an intuitive looking into the nature of things in contradistinction to the analytical or logical understanding of it. Practically, it means the unfolding of a new world, hitherto unperceived, in the confusion of a dualistically trained mind. Or we may say that with satori, our entire surroundings are viewed from quite an unexpected angle of perception. Whatever this is, the world for those who have gained a satori is no more the old world as it used to be. Even with all its flowering streams and burning fires, it is never the same one again. Logically stated, all its opposites and contradictions are united and harmonized into a consistent organic whole. And this is a mystery and a miracle, but according to the Zen masters, such is being performed every day. Satori can thus be had only through our once personally experiencing it. In the psychology of religion, this spiritual enhancement of one's whole life is called conversion, but as the term is generally used by Christian converts, it cannot be applied in its strict sense to the Buddhist experience, especially to that of the Zen followers. The term has too affective or emotional a shade to take the place of satori, which is above all noetic. The general tendency of Buddhism is, as we know, more intellectual than emotional, and its doctrine of enlightenment distinguishes it sharply from the Christian view of salvation. Zen, as one of the Mahayana schools, naturally shares a large amount of what we may call transcendental intellectualism, which does not issue in logical dualism. When poetically or figuratively expressed, satori is the opening of the mind flower, or the removing of the bar, or the brightening up of the mind works. If you wish to seek the Buddha, you ought to see into your own nature. For this nature is the Buddha himself. If you have not seen into your own nature, what is the use of thinking of the Buddha, reciting the sutras, observing a fast, or keeping the precepts? By thinking of the Buddha, your cause, i.e., meritorious deed, may bear fruit. By reciting the sutras, your intelligence may grow brighter. By keeping the precepts, you may be born in the heavens. By practicing charity, you may be rewarded abundantly. But as to seeking the Buddha, you are far away from him. If yourself is not yet clearly comprehended, you ought to see a wise teacher and get a thorough understanding as to the root of birth and death. One who has not seen into one's own nature is not to be called a wise teacher. When this seeing into one's own nature is not attained, one cannot escape from the transmigration of birth and death. However well one may be versed in the study of the sacred scriptures in 12 divisions, no time will ever come to one to get out of the sufferings of the triple world. Anciently, there was a Bhikshu Zensho, or Shan Singh, who was capable of reciting all the 12 divisions of scriptures, yet he could not save himself from transmigration because he had no insight into his own nature. If this was the case even with Zensho, how about those moderners who, being able to discourse only on a few sutras and sastras, regard themselves as exponents of Buddhism? They are truly simple-minded ones. When mind is not understood, it is absolutely of no avail to recite and discourse on idle literature. If you want to seek the Buddha, you ought to see into your own nature, which is the Buddha himself. The Buddha is a free man, a man who neither works nor achieves. If indeed of seeing into your own nature you turn away and seek the Buddha in external things, you will never get at him. The Buddha is your own mind. Make no mistake to bow to external objects. Buddha is a Western word, and in this country it means enlightened nature, and by enlightened is meant spiritually enlightened. It is one's own spiritual nature in enlightenment that responds to the external world. It comes in contact with objects, raises the eyebrows, winks the eyelids, and moves the hands and legs. This nature is the mind, and the mind is the Buddha, and the Buddha is the way, and the way is Zen. This simple word, Zen, is beyond the comprehension of both of the wise and the ignorant. To see directly into one's original nature, this is Zen. Even if you are well learned in hundreds of the sutras and sastras, you still remain an ignoramus in Buddhism when you have not yet seen into your own original nature. Buddhism is not there in mere learning. The highest truth is unfathomably deep. It's not an object of talk or discussion, and even the canonical texts have no way to bring it within our reach. Let us once see into our own original nature, and we have the truth, even when we are quite illiterate, not knowing a word. Those who have not seen into their own nature may read the sutras, think of the Buddha, study long, work hard, practice religion throughout the 6 periods of the day, sit for a long time and never lie down for sleep, and may be wide in learning and well-informed in all things, and they may believe that all this is Buddhism. All the Buddhas in successive ages only talk of seeing into one's nature. All things are impermanent until you get an insight into your nature. Do not say, I have perfect knowledge. Such is really committing a very grave crime. Ananda, one of the 10 great disciples of the Buddha, was known for his wide information, but did not have any insight into Buddhahood, because he was so bent on gaining information only. Here are some examples to show that the whole Zen discipline gains meaning when there takes place this turning of the mental hinge to a wider and deeper world. For when this wise and deeper world opens, everyday life, even the most trivial thing of it, grows loaded with the truths of Zen. On the one hand, therefore, satori is a most prosaic and matter-of-fact thing. On the other hand, a mystery. But after all, is not life itself filled with wonders, mysteries, and unfathomabilities far beyond our discursive understanding? A monk asked Jashu, who lived from 778 to 897, to be instructed in Zen. And said the master, "Have you had your breakfast or not?" "Yes, master, I have," answered the monk. "If so, have your dishes washed?" was an immediate response, which, it is said, at once opened the monk's mind to the truth of Zen. As to the opening of satori, all that Zen can do is to indicate the way, and leave the rest all to one's own experience, and that is to say, following up the indication and arriving at the goal. This is to be done by oneself and without another's help. With all that the master can do, he is helpless to make the disciple take hold of the thing unless the latter is inwardly fully prepared for it. And just as we cannot make a horse drink against his will, the taking hold of the ultimate reality is to be done by oneself. Just as the flower blooms out of its inner necessity, the looking into one's own nature must be the outcome of one's own inner overflowing. And this is where Zen is so personal and subjective in the sense of being inner and creative. Zen does not give us any intellectual assistance, nor does it waste time in arguing the point with us, but it merely suggests or indicates, not because it wants to be indefinite, but because that is really the only thing it can do for us. If it could, it would do anything to help us come to an understanding. In fact, Zen is exhausting every possible means to do that, as we can see in all the great masters' attitudes towards their disciples. When they are actually knocking them down, their kind-heartedness is never to be doubted. They are just waiting for the time when their pupils' minds get all ripened for the final moment. When this has come, the opportunity of opening an eye to the truth of Zen lies everywhere. One can pick it up in the hearing of an inarticulate sound, or listening to an unintelligible remark, or in the observation of a flower blooming, or in the encountering of any trivial, everyday incident, such as stumbling, rolling up a screen, using a fan, etc. And these are all sufficient conditions that will awaken one's inner sense. Evidently a most insignificant happening, and yet its effect on the mind infinitely surpasses all that one could expect of it. A light touch of an ignited wire and an explosion shaking the very foundations of the earth. In fact, all the causes of satori are in the mind. That is why, when the clock clicks, all that has been lying there bursts up like a volcanic eruption or flashes out like a bolt of lightning. Zen calls this returning to one's own home. For its followers will declare, "You have now found yourself. From the very beginning, nothing has been kept away from you. It was yourself that closed the eye to the fact." In Zen, there is nothing to explain, nothing to teach that will add to your knowledge, unless it grows out of yourself. No knowledge is really of value to you. A borrowed plumage never grows. As satori strikes at the primary fact of existence, its attainment marks a turning point in one's life. The attainment, however, must be thoroughgoing and clear-cut in order to produce a satisfactory result. To deserve the name satori, the mental revolution must be so complete as to make one really and sincerely feel that there took place a fiery baptism of the Spirit. The intensity of this feeling is proportional to the amount of effort the opener of satori has put into the achievement, for there is no gradation in satori as to its intensity, as in all our mental activity. The possessor of a lukewarm satori may suffer no such spiritual revolution as rinzai. Zen is a matter of character and not of the intellect, which means that Zen grows out of the will as the first principle of life. A brilliant intellect may fail to unravel all the mysteries of Zen, but a strong soul will drink deep of the inexhaustible fountain. I do not know if the intellect is superficial and touches only the fringe of one's personality, but the fact is that the will is the man himself, and Zen appeals to it. When one becomes penetratingly conscious of the working of this agency, there is the opening of satori and the understanding of Zen. As they say, the snake has now grown into the dragon, or more graphically, a common cur, a most miserable creature wagging its tail for food and sympathy, and kicked about by the street boys so mercilessly, has now turned into a golden-haired lion, whose roar frightens to death all the feeble-minded. When our consideration is limited to the objective side of satori, it does not appear to be a very extraordinary thing, this opening an eye to the truth of Zen. The master makes some remarks, and if they happen to be opportune enough, the disciple will come at once to a realization and see into a mystery hitherto undreamed of. It seems all to depend upon what kind of mood or what state of mental preparedness one is in at the moment. Zen is, after all, a haphazard affair. One may be tempted to think, but when we know that it took Nangaku 8 long years to answer the question, "Who is he that thus cometh towards me?" we shall realize the fact that there was in him a great deal of mental anguish and tribulation, which he had to go through before he could come to the final solution and declare, even when one asserts that it is a somewhat, one misses it altogether. We must try to look into the psychological aspect of satori, where is revealed the inner mechanism of opening the door to the eternal secrets of the human soul. In olden days, when I was at Soke, Shuangjing, before 1 month was over after my return to the meditation hall there, one night, while deep in sleep, I suddenly found myself fixing my attention on the question, all things return to the One. But where does this One return? My attention was so rigidly fixed on this that I neglected sleeping, forgot to eat, and did not distinguish east from west nor morning from night. While spreading the napkin, producing the bowls, or attending to my natural wants, whether I moved or rested, whether I talked or kept silent, my whole existence was wrapped up with the question, where does this One return? No other thoughts ever disturbed my consciousness. No, even if I wanted to stir up the least bit of thought irrelevant to the central One, I could not do so. It was like being screwed up or glued. However much I tried to shake myself off, it refused to move. Though I was in the midst of a crowd or a congregation, I felt as if I were all by myself. From morning till evening, from evening till morning, so transparent, so tranquil, so majestically above all things were my feelings. Absolutely pure, and not a particle of dust. My one thought covered eternity. So calm was the outside world. so oblivious of the existence of other people I was. Like an idiot, like an imbecile. 6 days and nights thus elapsed when I entered the shrine with the rest, reciting the sutras, and happened to raise my head and looked at the verse by Gosso. This made me all of a sudden awake from the spell, and the meaning of, "Who carries this lifeless corpse of yours?" burst upon me, the question once given by an old master. I felt as if this boundless space itself were broken up into pieces, and the great earth were altogether leveled away. I forgot myself. I forgot the world. It was like one mirror reflecting another. I tried several koan in my mind and found them so transparently clear. I was no more deceived as to the wonderful working of prana, transcendental wisdom. When Koho saw his old master later, the latter lost no time in asking him, "Who is it that carries this lifeless corpse of yours?" Koho burst out a "Quats!" Therefore the master took up a stick, ready to give him a blow. But the disciple held it back, saying, "You cannot give me a blow today." "Why can't I?" was the master's demand. Instead of replying to him, however, Koho left the room briskly. The following day the master asked him, "All things return to the One, and where does the One return to?" "The dog is lapping the boiling water in the cauldron." "Where did you get this nonsense?" reprimanded the master. "You had better ask yourself," promptly came the response. The master rested well satisfied. These cases show what mental process one has to go through before the opening of satori takes place. Of course, these are prominent examples and highly accentuated, and every satori is not preceded by such an extraordinary degree of concentration. But an experience more or less like this must be the necessary antecedent to all satori, especially to that which is to be gone through at the outset of the study. The mirror of mind, or the field of consciousness, then seems to be so thoroughly swept clean as not to leave a particle of dust on it. When thus all mentation is temporarily suspended, even the consciousness of an effort to keep an idea focused at the center of attention is gone. That is, when, as the Zen followers say, the mind is so completely possessed or identified with its object of thought that even the consciousness of identity is lost. As when one mirror reflects another, the subject feels as if living in a crystal palace, all transparent, refreshing, buoyant, and royal. But the end has not yet been reached, this being merely the preliminary condition leading to the consummation called satori. If the mind remains in this state of fixation, there will be no occasion for its being awakened to the truth of Zen. It must be broken up and exploded into the next stage, which is looking into one's nature, or the opening of satori. The explosion, as it is nothing else, generally takes place when this finely balanced equilibrium tilts for one reason or another. A stone is thrown into a sheet of water in perfect stillness, and the disturbance at once spreads all over the surface. It is somewhat like this. A sound knocks at the gate of consciousness so tightly closed, and it at once reverberates through the entire being of the individual. He is awakened in the most vivid sense of the world. He comes out baptized in the fire of creation. He has seen the work of God in his very workshop. The occasion may not necessarily be the hearing of a temple bell. It may be reading a stanza or seeing something moving or the sense of touch irritated, when a most highly accentuated state of concentration bursts out into a satori. chief characteristics of satori. Number one, irrationality. And by this I mean that satori is not a conclusion to be reached by reasoning and defies all intellectual determination. Those who have experienced it are always at a loss to explain it coherently or logically. When it is explained at all, either in words or gestures, its content more or less undergoes a mutilation. The uninitiated are thus unable to grasp it by what is outwardly visible, while those who have had the experience discern what is genuine from what is not. The satori experience is thus always characterized by irrationality, inexplicability, and incommunicability. Number two, intuitive insight. That there is a noetic quality in mystic experiences has been pointed out by William James in his Varieties of Religious Experience, and this applies also to the Zen experience known as satori. Another name for satori is kensho, meaning to see essence or nature, which apparently proves that there is seeing or perceiving in satori, that this seeing is of quite a different quality from what is ordinarily designated as knowledge, need not be specifically noted. Hui Kei is reported to have made this statement concerning his satori, which was confirmed by Bodhidharma himself. As to my satori, it is not a total annihilation. It is knowledge of the most adequate kind, only it cannot be expressed in words. In this respect, Shen Hui was more explicit, for he says that the one character, chi, or knowledge, is the source of all mysteries. Number three, authoritativeness. By this I mean that the knowledge realized by satori is final, that no amount of logical argument can refute it. Being direct and personal, it is sufficient unto itself. All that logic can do here is to explain it, to interpret it in connection with other kinds of knowledge with which our minds are filled. Satori is thus a form of perception, an inner perception, which takes place in the most interior part of consciousness. Hence the sense of authoritativeness, which means finality. So it is generally said that Zen is like drinking water, for it is by oneself that one knows whether it is warm or cold. The Zen perception being the last term of experience. It cannot be denied by outsiders who have no such experience. Number four, affirmation. What is authoritative and final can never be negative, for negation has no value for our life. It leads us nowhere. It is not a power that urges, nor does it give one a place to rest. Though the satori experience is sometimes expressed in negative terms, it is essentially an affirmative attitude towards all things that exist. It accepts them as they come along, regardless of their moral values. Buddhists call this shanti, or patience, or more properly, acceptance. That is, acceptance of things in their supra-relative or transcendental aspect, where no dualism of whatever sort avails. Number five, sense of the beyond. Terminology may differ in different religions, and in satori there's always what we may call a sense of the beyond. The experience indeed is my own, but I feel it to be rooted elsewhere. The individual shell, in which my personality is so solidly encased, explodes at the moment of satori, not necessarily that I get unified with a greater being than myself, or absorbed in it, but that my individuality, which I found rigidly held together and definitely kept separate from other individual existences, becomes loosened somehow from its tightening grip and melts away into something indescribable, something which is of quite a different order from what I am accustomed to. The feeling that follows is that of a complete release or a complete rest. The feeling that one has arrived, finally, at the destination. Coming home and quietly resting is the expression generally used by Zen followers. The story of the prodigal son in the Sadharman Pundarika, in the Vajra Samadhi, and also in the New Testament, points to the same feeling one has at the moment of a satori experience. Number 6, impersonal tone. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the Zen experience is that it has no personal note in it, as is observable in Christian mystic experiences. There is no reference whatever in Buddhist satori to such personal and frequently sexual feelings and relationships as are to be gleaned from these terms: flame of love, a wonderful love shed in the heart, embrace, the beloved, bride, bridegroom, spiritual matrimony, Father, God, the Son of God, God's child, etc. We may say that all these terms are interpretations based on a definite system of thought and really have nothing to do with the experience itself. At any rate, alike in India, China, and Japan, satori has remained thoroughly impersonal, or rather highly intellectual. Is this owing to the peculiar character of Buddhist philosophy? Does the experience itself take its colors from the philosophy or theology? Whatever this is, there is no doubt that in spite of its having some points of similitude to the Christian mystic experience, the Zen experience is singularly devoid of personal or human colorings. Chao Pian, a great government officer of the Sung dynasty, was a lay disciple of Faxuan of Changshan. One day after his official duties were over, he found himself leisurely sitting in his office when all of a sudden a clash of thunder burst on his ear, and he realized a state of satori. The poem he then composed depicts one aspect of the Zen experience. Devoid of thought, I sat quietly by the desk in my official room, with my fountain mind undisturbed, as serene as water. A sudden clash of thunder, the mind doors burst open, and lo, there sitteth the old man in all his homeliness. Number 7, feeling of exaltation. That this feeling inevitably accompanies satori is due to the fact that it is the breaking up of the restriction imposed on one as an individual being. And this breaking up is not a mere negative incident, but quite a positive one, fraught with signification, because it means an infinite expansion of the individual. The general feeling, though we are not always conscious of it, which characterizes all our functions of consciousness, is that of restriction and dependence. Because consciousness itself is the outcome of two forces conditioning or restricting each other. Satori, on the contrary, essentially consists in doing away with the opposition of two terms in whatsoever sense. And this opposition is the principle of consciousness, as before mentioned, while satori is to realize the unconscious, which goes beyond the opposition. To be released of this, therefore, must make one feel above all things intensely exalted. A wandering outcast, maltreated everywhere, not only by others, but by himself, finds that he is the possessor of all the wealth and power that is ever attainable in this world by a mortal being. If this does not give him a high feeling of self-glorification, what could? Says a Zen master. When you have satori, you are able to reveal a palatial mansion made of precious stones on a single blade of grass. But when you have no satori, a palatial mansion itself is concealed behind a simple blade of grass. Another Zen master, evidently alluding to the Avatamsaka, declares, O monks, lo and behold, a most auspicious light is shining with the utmost brilliancy all over the great Chiliocosm, simultaneously revealing all the countries, all the oceans, all the Sumerus, all the suns and moons, all the heavens, all the lands, each of which number as many as hundreds of thousands of kotis. O monks, do you not see the light? But the Zen feeling of exaltation is rather a quiet feeling of self-contentment. It is not at all demonstrative when the first glow of it passes away. The unconscious does not proclaim itself so boisterously in the Zen consciousness. Number 8, momentariness. Satori comes upon one abruptly and is a momentary experience. In fact, if it is not abrupt and momentary, it is not satori. And this abruptness is what characterizes the Huineng school of Zen ever since its proclamation late in the 7th century. His opponent, Shen Sui, was insistent on a gradual unfoldment of Zen consciousness. Huineng's followers were thus distinguished as strong upholders of the doctrine of abruptness. This abrupt experience of satori then opens up in one moment an altogether new vista, and the whole existence is appraised from quite a new angle of observation. Practical methods of Zen instruction. As I conceive it, Zen is the ultimate fact of all philosophy and religion. Every intellectual effort must culminate in it, or rather must start from it, if it is to bear any practical fruits. Every religious faith must spring from it if it has to prove at all efficiently and livingly workable in our active life. Therefore, Zen is not necessarily the fountain of Buddhist thought and life alone. It is also very much alive in Christianity, the Muslim faith, Taoism, and even in Confucianism. But what makes all these religious and philosophies vital and inspiring, keeping up their usefulness and efficiency, is due to the presence in them of what I may designate as the Zen element. Mere scholasticism will never create a living faith. Religion requires something inwardly compelling, energizing, and capable of doing work. The intellect is useful in its place, but when it tries to cover the whole field of religion, it dries up the source of life. Feeling or mere faith is so blind and will grasp anything that may come across and hold to it as the final reality. Fanaticism is vital enough as far as its explosiveness is concerned, but this is not a true religion, and its practical sequence is the destruction of the whole system, not to speak of the fate of its own being. Zen is what makes the religious feeling run through its legitimate channel and what gives life to the intellect. Zen does this by giving one a new point of view on things, a new way of appreciating the truth and beauty of life and the world, by discovering a new source of energy in the inmost recesses of consciousness, and by bestowing on one a feeling of completeness and sufficiency. That is to say, Zen works miracles by overhauling the whole system of one's inner life and opening up a world hitherto entirely undreamt of. This may be called a resurrection, and Zen tends to emphasize the speculative element, though confessedly it opposes this more than anything else in the whole process of the spiritual revolution, and in this respect, Zen is truly Buddhistic. Or it may be better to say that Zen makes use of the phraseology belonging to the sciences of speculative philosophy. Evidently, the feeling element is not so prominently visible in Zen as in the Pure Land sects, where bhakti, or faith, is all in all. Zen, on the other hand, emphasizes the faculty of seeing, that is darsana, or knowing, vidya, though not in the sense of reasoning out, but in that of intuitively grasping. According to the philosophy of Zen, we are too much of a slave to the conventional way of thinking, which is dualistic through and through. No interpenetration is allowed. There takes place no fusing of opposites in our everyday logic. What belongs to God is not of this world, and what is of this world is incompatible with the divine. Black's not black, and white is not black. Tiger is tiger, and cat is cat, and they will never be one. Water flows, a mountain towers. This is the way things or ideas go in this universe of the senses. Zen, however, upsets this scheme of thought and substitutes a new one in which there exists no logic, no dualistic arrangement of ideas. The idea of absolute oneness is not the exclusive possession of Zen. There are other religions and philosophies that preach the same doctrine. Eckhart says that we are all seeking repose, whether consciously or not, just as the stone cannot cease moving until it touches the earth. Evidently, the repose we seemed to enjoy before we were awakened to the contradictions involved in our logic was not the real one. The stone has kept moving down towards the ground, where then is the ground of non-dualism, on which the soul can be really and truthfully tranquil and blessed. To quote Eckhart again, simple people conceive that we are to see God as if He stood on that side and we on this. It is not so. God and I are one in the act of my perceiving Him. And this absolute oneness of things, Zen establishes the foundations of its philosophy. The idea of absolute oneness is not the exclusive possession of Zen. There are other religions and philosophies that preach the same doctrine. If Zen, like other monisms or theisms, merely laid down this principle and did not have anything specifically to be known as Zen, it would have long ceased to exist as such. But there is in Zen something unique, which makes up its life and justifies its claim to be the most precious heritage of Eastern culture. The following mondo or dialogue, literally questioning and answering, will give us a glimpse into the ways of Zen. A monk asked Joshu, one of the greatest masters in China, "What is the one ultimate word of truth?" Instead of giving him any specific answer, he made a simple response saying, "Yes." Well, the monk, who naturally failed to see any sense in this kind of response, asked for a second time, and to this the master roared back, "I am not deaf." See how irrelevantly, shall I say, the all-important problem of absolute oneness or of the ultimate reason is treated here? But this is characteristic of Zen. This is where Zen transcends logic and overrides the tyranny and misrepresentation of ideas. Zen mistrusts the intellect. It does not rely upon traditional and dualistic methods of reasoning, and handles problems after its own original manners. Zen is like learning the art of burglary. The son of a burglar saw his father growing older and thought, if he is unable to carry out his profession, who will be the breadwinner of this family except myself? I must learn the trade. He intimated the idea to his father, who approved of it. One night, the father took the son to a big house, broke through the fence, entered the house, and opening one of the large chests, told the son to go in and pick out the clothings. As soon as he got into it, the lid was dropped and the lock securely applied. The father now came out to the courtyard, and loudly knocking at the door, woke up the whole family, whereas he himself quietly slipped away by the former hole in the fence. The residents got excited and lighted candles, but found that the burglars had already gone. The son, who remained all the time in the chest, securely confined, thought of his cruel father. He was greatly mortified when a fine idea flashed upon him. He made a noise which sounded like the gnawing of a rat. The family told the maid to take a candle and examine the chest. When the lid was unlocked, out came the prisoner, who blew out the light, pushed away the maid, and fled. The people ran after him. Noticing a well by the road, he picked up a large stone and threw it in the water. The pursuers all gathered around the well, trying to find the burglar, drowning himself in the dark hole. In the meantime, he was safely back in his father's house. He blamed the latter very much for his narrow escape. Said the father, "Be not offended, my son. Just tell me how you got off." When the son told him all about his adventures, the father remarked, "There you are. You have learned the art." The reason of unreason, the koan exercise. What is koan? A koan, according to one authority, means a public document setting up a standard of judgment, whereby one's Zen understanding is tested as to its correctness. A koan is generally some statement made by an old Zen master or some answer of his given to a questioner. The following are some that are commonly given to the uninitiated. A monk asked Tung Shan, "Who is the Buddha?" 3 chin of flax. Yun Men was once asked, "When not a thought is stirring in one's mind, is there any error here?" As much as Mount Sumeru. As much as Mount Sumeru. Chow Chow answered, "Wu," mu in Japanese, to a monk's question. "Is there Buddha nature in a dog?" Wu literally means not or none, but when this is ordinarily given as a koan, it has no preference to its literal signification. It is Wu, pure and simple. When Ming the monk overtook the fugitive Huineng, he wanted Huineng to give up the secret of Zen. Huineng replied, "What are your original features which you have even prior to your birth?" A monk asked Chow Chow, "What is the meaning of the first patriarch's visit to China?" The cypress tree in the front courtyard. When Chow Chow came to study Zen under Nan Chuan, he asked, "What is the Tao or the way?" Nan Chuan replied, "Your everyday mind, that is the Tao." A monk asked, "All things are said to be reducible to the one, but where is the one to be reduced?" Chow Chow answered, "When I was in the district of Qing, I had a robe made that weighed 7 chin. When Pang, the old Zen adept, first came to Matsu in order to master Zen, he asked, 'Who is he who has no companion among the 10,000 things of the world?' Matsu replied, 'When you swallow up in one draught all the water in the Tsi Chiang, I will tell you.' When such problems are given to the uninitiated for solution, what is the object of the master? The idea is to unfold the Zen psychology in the mind of the uninitiated and to reproduce the state of consciousness of which these statements are the expression. That is to say, when the koans are understood, the master's state of mind is understood, which is satori, and without which Zen is a sealed book. In the beginning of Zen history, a question was brought up by the pupil to the notice of the master, who thereby gauged the mental state of the questioner and knew what necessary help to give him. The help thus given was sometimes enough to awaken him to realization, but more frequently than not, puzzled and perplexed him beyond description, and the result was an ever-increasing mental strain or searching and contriving on the part of the pupil. In actual cases, however, the master would have to wait for a long while for the pupil's first question, if it were coming at all. To ask the first question means more than half the way to its own solution, for it is the outcome of a most intense mental effort for the questioner to bring his mind to a crisis. The question indicates that the crisis is reached, and the mind is ready to leave it behind. An experienced master often knows how to lead the pupil to a crisis and to make him successfully pass it. This was really the case before the koan exercise came in vogue. As time went on, there grew up many questions and answers, which were exchanged between masters and pupils. And with the growth of Zen literature, it was perfectly natural now for Zen followers to begin to attempt an intellectual solution or interpretation of it. The questions and answers ceased to be experiences and intuitions of Zen consciousness and became subjects of logical inquiry. And this was disastrous, yet inevitable. Therefore, the Zen master, who wished for the normal development of Zen consciousness and the vigorous growth of Zen tradition, would not fail to recognize rightly the actual state of things, and to devise such a method as to achieve finally the attainment of the Zen truth. The method that would suggest itself in the circumstances was to select some of the statements made by the old masters and to use them as pointers. A pointer would then function in two directions. One, to check the working of the intellect, or rather to let the intellect see by itself how far it can go, and also that there is a realm into which it, as such, can never enter, to affect the maturity of Zen consciousness, which eventually breaks out into a state of satori. When the koan works in the first direction, there takes place what has been called searching and contriving. Instead of the intellect, which taken by itself forms only a part of our being, the entire personality, mind and body, is thrown out into the solution of the koan. When this extraordinary state of spiritual tension, guided by an experienced master, is made to mature, the koan works itself out into what has been designated as the Zen experience. An intuition of the truth of Zen is now attained, for the wall against which the yogin has been beating hitherto to no purpose breaks down, and an entirely new vista opens before him. Without the koan, the Zen consciousness loses its pointer, and there will never be a state of satori. A psychological impasse is the necessary antecedent of satori. Formerly, that is, before the days of the koan exercise, the antecedent pointer was created in the consciousness of the yogin by his intense spirituality. But when Zen became systematized, owing to the accumulation of Zen literature in the shape of questions and answers, the indispensability of the koan had come to be universally recognized by the masters. The worst enemy of Zen experience, at least in the beginning, is the intellect, which consists and insists in discriminating subject from object. The discriminating intellect, therefore, must be cut short if Zen consciousness is to unfold itself. And the koan is constructed eminently to serve this end. On examination, we at once notice that there is no room in the koan to insert an intellectual interpretation. The knife is not sharp enough to cut the koan open and see what are its contents. For a koan is not logical proposition, but the expression of a certain mental state resulting from the Zen discipline. For instance, what logical connection can there be between the Buddha and the 3 shin of flax, or between the Buddha nature and Wu, or between the secret message of Bodhidharma and a cypress tree? In a noted Zen textbook known as Hekiganshu, Yuan Wu gives the following notes concerning the 3 chin of flax, showing how the koan was interpreted by those pseudo-Zen followers who failed to grasp Zen. There are some people these days who do not truly understand this koan. This is because there's no crack in it to insert their intellectual teeth. And by this I mean that it is altogether too plain and tasteless. Various answers have been given by different masters to the question, what is the Buddha? One said, he sits in the Buddha hall. Another said, the one endowed with the 32 marks of excellence. Still another, a bamboo root whip. None, however, can excel Tung-shan's 3 chin of flax as regards its irrationality, which cuts off all passage of speculation. Some comment that Tung-shan was weighing flax at the moment, hence the answer. Others say that it was a trick of equivocation on the part of Tung-shan, and still others think that as the questioner was not conscious of the fact that he was himself the Buddha, Tung-shan answered him in this indirect way. Such commentators are all like corpses, for they are utterly unable to comprehend the living truth. There are still others, however, who take the 3 chin of flax as the Buddha, thus giving it a pantheistic interpretation. What wild and fantastic remarks they make! As long as they are beguiled by words, they can never expect to penetrate into the heart of Tung-shan, even if they live to the time of Maitreya Buddha. Why? Because words are merely a vehicle on which the truth is carried. Not comprehending the meaning of the old master, they endeavor to find it in his words only, but they will find therein nothing to lay their hands on. The truth itself is beyond all description, and is affirmed by an ancient sage, but it is by words that the truth is manifested. Let us then forget the words when we gain the truth itself. This is done only when we have an insight through experience into that which is indicated by words. The 3 chin of flax is like the royal thoroughfare to the capital. When you are once on it, every step you take is in the right direction. When Yun Men was once asked what was the teaching that went beyond the Buddhas and the patriarchs, he said, dumpling. Yun Men and Tung-shan are walking the same road hand in hand. When you are thoroughly cleansed of all the impurities of discrimination, without further ado, the truth will be understood. Later, the monk who wanted to know what the Buddha was went to Chi Men and asked him what Tung-shan meant by 3 chin of flax. Said Chi Men, a mass of flowers, a mass of brocade. He added, do you understand? The monk replied, no. Bamboos in the south, trees in the north, was the conclusion of men. Now, technically speaking, the koan given to the uninitiated is intended to destroy the root of life, to make the calculating mind die, to root out the entire mind that has been at work since eternity, etc. Now, this may sound murderous, but the ultimate intent is to go beyond the limits of intellection. And these limits can be crossed over only by exhausting oneself once for all, by using up all the psychic powers at one's command. Logic then turns into psychology, intellection into conation, and intuition. What could not be solved on the plane of empirical consciousness is now transferred to the deeper recesses of the mind. So, says a Zen master, unless at one time perspiration has streamed down your back, you cannot see the boat sailing before the wind. Unless you have been thoroughly drenched in a perspiration, you cannot expect to see the revelation of a palace of pearls on a blade of grass. The koan refuses to be solved under any easier conditions, but once solved, the koan is compared to a piece of brick used to knock at a gate. When the gate is opened, the brick is thrown away. The koan is useful as long as the mental doors are closed, but when they are opened, it may be forgotten. What one sees after the opening will be something quite unexpected, something that has never before entered even into one's imagination. But when the koan is re-examined from this newly acquired point of view, how marvelously suggestive, how fittingly constructed, although there is nothing artificial here. Practical instructions regarding the koan exercise. The following are some of the practical suggestions that have been given by Zen masters of various ages regarding the koan exercise. And from them, we can gather what a koan is expected to do towards the development of Zen consciousness, and also what tendency the koan exercise has come to manifest as time goes on. As we'll see later on, the growth of the koan exercise caused a new movement among the Zen masters of the Ming dynasty to connect it with Nembutsu, that is, the recitation of the Buddha name. A Zen master of Huang Po Shan, probably of early Sun, gives the following instruction in the study of Zen. O you brother monks, you may talk glibly and perhaps intelligently about Zen, about Tao, and scoff at the Buddhas and patriarchs, but when the day comes to reckon up all your accounts, your lip Zen will be of no avail. Thus far you have been beguiling others, but today you will find that you have been beguiling yourselves. O you brother monks, while still strong and healthy in body, try to have a real understanding as to what Zen is. After all, it is not such a difficult thing to take hold of the lock, but simply because you have not made up your minds to die in the last ditch. If you do not find a way to realization, you say, it is too difficult, it is beyond my power, it is absurd. If you are really men of will, you will find out what your koan means. A monk once asked Chow Chow, has a dog the Buddha nature? To which the master answered, Wu. Now, devote yourselves to this koan and try to find its meaning. Devote yourselves to it day and night. Whether sitting or lying, whether walking or standing, devote yourselves to its solution during the entire course of the 12 periods, even when dressing or taking meals or attending to your natural wants. Have your every thought fixed on the koan. Make resolute efforts to keep it always before your mind. The old saying runs, when there is enough faith, there is enough doubt, which is a great spirit of inquiry. And when there is great spirit of inquiry, there is an illumination. Have everyone thoroughly poured out that has accumulated in your mind, learning, hearing, false understanding, clever or witty sayings, the so-called truth of Zen, Buddha's teachings, self-conceit, arrogance, etc. Concentrate yourself on the koan, of which you have not yet had a penetrating comprehension. That is to say, cross your legs firmly, erect your spinal column straight, and paying no attention to the periods of the day, keep up your concentration until you grow unaware of your whereabouts, east, west, south, north, as if you were a living corpse. The mind moves in response to the outside world, and when it is touched, it knows. The time will come when all thoughts cease to stir, and there will be no working of consciousness. It is then that all of a sudden you smash your brain to pieces and for the first time realize that the truth is in your own possession from the very beginning. Would not this be great satisfaction to you in your daily life? Tai Hui was a great koan advocate of the 12th century. One of his favorite koans was Chow Chow's Wu, but he had also one of his own. He used to carry a short bamboo stick which he held forth before an assembly of monks, and he said, if you call this a stick, you affirm. If you call it not a stick, you negate. Beyond affirmation and negation, what would you call it? In the following extract from his sermons titled Tai Hui Pu Shu, compiled by Tsui Ching in 1190, he gives still another koan to his gardener monk, Ching Kuang. The truth, or Dharma, is not to be mastered by mere seeing, hearing, and thinking. If it is no more than the seeing, hearing, and thinking. It is not at all seeking after the truth itself, for the truth is not in what you hear from others or learn through the understanding. Now, keep yourself away from what you have seen, heard, and thought, and see what you have within yourself. Emptiness only, nothingness, which eludes your grasp and to which you cannot fix your thought. Why? Because this is the abode where the senses can never reach. If this abode were within the reach of your sense, it would be something you could think of, something you could have a glimpse of. It would then be something subject to the law of birth and death. The main thing is to shut off all your sense organs and make your consciousness like a block of wood. When this block of wood suddenly starts up and makes a noise, that is the moment you feel like a lion roaming about freely with no body disturbing him, or like an elephant that crosses a stream, not minding its swift current. At that moment, there is no fidgeting, nothing doing, just this and no more, says Pieng Tien the Elder. The celestial radiance undimmed, the norm lasting forevermore. For him who entereth this gate, no reasoning, no learning. You should know that it is through your seeing, hearing, and thinking that you enter upon the path, and it is also through the seeing, hearing, and thinking that you are prevented from entering. Why? Let you be furnished with the double-bladed sword that destroys and resuscitates life where you have your seeing, hearing, and thinking, and you will be able to make good use of the seeing, hearing, and thinking. But if the sword that cuts both ways, that destroys as well as resuscitates, is missing, your seeing, hearing, and thinking will be a great stumbling block, which will cause you to prostrate again and again on the ground. Your truth eye will be completely blinded. You will be walking in complete darkness, not knowing how to be free and independent. If you want, however, to be the free master of yourself by doing away with your seeing, hearing, and thinking, stop your hankering monkey-like mind from doing mischief. Keep it quietly under control. Keep your mind firmly collected regardless of what you are doing, sitting or lying, standing or walking, remaining silent or talking. Keep your mind like a line, stretched, taut. Do not let it slip out of your hand. Just as soon as it slips out of your control, you will find it in the service of the seeing, hearing, and thinking. In such a case, is there any remedy? What remedy is applicable here? A monk asked Yunmen, "Who is the Buddha?" The dried-up dirt cleaner. This is the remedy. Whether you are walking or sitting or lying, let your mind be perpetually fixed on this dirt cleaner. The time will come when your mind will suddenly come to a stop, like an old rat who finds himself in a cul-de-sac. Then there will be a plunging into the unknown with the cry, "Ah, this!" When this cry is uttered, you have discovered yourself. You find at the same time that all the teachings of the ancient worthies expounded in the Buddhist Tripitaka, the Taoist scriptures, and the Confucian classics are no more than commentaries upon your own sudden cry, "Ah, this!" Tai Hui was never tired of impressing upon his disciples the importance of having satori, which goes beyond language and reasoning, and which bursts out in one's consciousness by overstepping the limits of consciousness. His letters and sermons are filled with advice and instructions directed towards this end. I quote one or two of them. That he was so insistent on this point proves that Zen, in his day, was degenerating to a form of mere quietism on the one hand, and on the other hand, to the intellectual analysis of the koans left by the old masters. The study of Zen must end in satori. It is like a holiday race boat, which is ordinarily put away in some quiet corner, but which is designed for winning a regatta. And this has been the case with all the ancient masters of Zen, for we know that Zen is really won only when we have satori. You have to have satori somehow, but you will never get what you want by trying to be quiet with yourself, by sitting like a dead man. Why? Does not one of the patriarchs say that when you attempt to gain quietness by suppressing activity, your quietness will all the more be susceptible to disturbance? However earnestly you may try to quiet your confused mind, the result will be altogether contrary to what you expect to realize, so long as your reasoning habit continues. Abandon, therefore, this reasoning habit. Have the two characters, birth and death, pasted on your forehead, and fix your attention exclusively on the following koan, as if you were oppressed under the obligation of a very, very heavy debt. Think of the koan regardless of what you are doing, regardless of what time of the day it is, day or night. A monk asked Chow Chow, "Has a dog the Buddha nature or not?" Said Chow, "Wu." Collect your thoughts upon this wu and see what is contained in it. As your concentration goes on, you will find the koan altogether devoid of taste, that is, without any intellectual clue whereby to fathom its content. Yet in the meantime, you may have a feeling of joy stealing into your heart, which, however, is soon followed by another feeling, this time a feeling of disquietude. Zen, Part 5, Chapter 6, The Reason of Unreason, the koan exercise. What is koan? A koan, according to one authority, means a public document setting up a standard of judgment, whereby one's Zen understanding is tested as to its correctness. A koan is generally some statement made by an old Zen master or some answer of his given to a questioner. The following are some that are commonly given to the uninitiated. A monk asked Tung Shan, "Who is the Buddha?" 3 chin of flax. Yun Men was once asked, "When not a thought is stirring in one's mind, is there any error here?" As much as Mount Sumeru. As much as Mount Sumeru. Chow Chow answered, "Wu," mu in Japanese, to a monk's question. Is there Buddha nature in a dog? Wu literally means not or none, but when this is ordinarily given as a koan, it has no preference to its literal signification. It is Wu, pure and simple. When Ming the monk overtook the fugitive Hui Neng, he wanted Hui Neng to give up the secret of Zen. Hui Neng replied, "What are your original features which you have even prior to your birth?" A monk asked Chow Chow, "What is the meaning of the first patriarch's visit to China?" The cypress tree in the front courtyard. When Chow Chow came to study Zen under Nan Chuan, he asked, "What is the Tao or the way?" Nan Chuan replied, "Your everyday mind. That is the Tao." A monk asked, "All things are said to be reducible to the one, but where is the one to be reduced?" "But where is the one to be reduced?" Chow Chow answered, "When I was in the district of Qing, I had a robe made that weighed 7 chin. What is required of Zen devotees is to see into the phrase that liveth and not into the one which is dead, Try to search for the sense of the cone you have, putting your whole mental strength into the task like the mother hen sitting on her eggs, like a cat trying to catch a rat, like a hungry one eagerly looking everywhere for food, like a thirsty one seeking for water, like a child thinking of its mother. If you exert yourself as seriously and as desperately as that, the time will surely come when the sense of the koan will dawn upon you. There are 3 factors making for success in the study of Zen. Number 1, great faith. Number 2, great resolution. And 3, great spirit of inquiry. When any one of these is lacking, it is like a cauldron with a broken leg. It limps. At all moments of your life, regardless of what you are doing, exert yourself to see into the meaning of the Chow Chow's Wu. Keep the koan always before your mind, and never release the spirit of inquiry. As the inquiry goes on steadily and uninterruptedly, you will come to see that there is no intellectual clue in the koan, that it is altogether devoid of sense as you ordinarily understood that word, that it is entirely flat, devoid of taste, has nothing appetizing about it, and that you are beginning to have a certain feeling of uneasiness and impatience. When you come to this state, it is the moment for you to throw yourself down into the abyss, and by so doing lay a foundation for Buddhahood. Do not think that the meaning of the koan is at the moment of your holding it up for solution. Do not reason about it, or exercise your imagination over it. Do not wait for satori to come over you by clearing your mind of its confused ideas. Only collect yourself on the unintelligibility of the koan, over which the mind evidently has no control. You will finally find yourself like an old rat getting into the furthest corner of the barn, where it suddenly perceives by veering clear round the way of escape. To measure the koan by an intellectual standard, as you ordinarily do with other things, to live your life up and down in the stream of birth and death, to be always assailed by feelings of fear, worry, and uncertainty, all this is owing to your imagination and calculating mind. You ought to know how to rise above the trivialities of life, in which most people are found drowning themselves. Do not waste time asking how to do it. Just put your whole soul into the business. It is like a mosquito biting at an iron bull. At the very moment the iron absolutely rejects your frail proboscis, you for once forget yourself. You penetrate, and the work is done. Sufficient authorities have now been quoted to show where lies the function of the koan in bringing about what is known as satori, and also to show what the Zen master had in mind when he first began to exercise the minds of his disciples towards the maturing of their Zen consciousness. In the way of summary, I conclude with a passage from the writings of the Hakuin, who is father of the modern Japanese Rinzai school of Zen. In this we will see how the psychology of Zen has been going on without much change for more than 1,000 years, since the days of Hui Neng and his Chinese followers. If you want to get at the unadulterated truth of egolessness, you must once for all let go your hold and fall over the precipice, when you will rise again newly awakened and in full possession of the 4 virtues of eternity, bliss, freedom, and purity, which belong to the real ego. What does it mean to let go of your hold on the precipice? Suppose a man has wandered out among the remote mountains, where no one else has ever ventured. He comes to the edge of a precipice unfathomably deep. The rugged rock covered with moss is extremely slippery, giving him no sure foothold. He can neither advance nor retreat. Death is looking at him in the face. His only hope lies in holding on to the vine which his hands have grasped. His very life depends on his holding on to it. if he should, by carelessness, let go his hold, his body would be thrown down to the abyss and crushed to pieces, bones and all. It is the same with the student of Zen. When he grapples with a koan single-handedly, he will come to see that he has reached the limit of his mental tension, and he is brought to a standstill. Like the man hanging over the precipice, he is completely at a loss what to do next. Except for occasional feelings of uneasiness and despair, it is like death itself. All of a sudden, he finds his mind and body wiped out of existence, together with the koan. This is what is known as letting go your hold. As you become awakened from the stupor and regain your breath, it is like drinking water and knowing for yourself that it is cold. It will be a joy inexpressible. The role of nature in Zen Buddhism. At the outset, it is advisable to know what we mean by nature, for the term is ambiguous and has been used in various senses. Let me here just mention a few of the ideas associated in the Western mind with nature. The first thing is that nature is contrasted with God. The natural stands on the one hand against the divine. Nature is something working against what is godly, and in this sense often means creation, or the earth. God created the world, but strangely, the world goes against him, and God is found fighting against his own creation. The adjective natural, while in one sense standing in contrast to the divine, in another sense accords with it. When naturalness is used in contrast to artificiality, it acquires something of the divine. Childlikeness is often compared to godliness. Child life has more in it of godliness than adult life, being much closer to nature. God, then, is not altogether absent in nature. When we contrast nature with man, we emphasize the physical, material aspect of nature rather than its moral or spiritual aspect, which is preeminently involved when we contrast it with God. Nature has thus two aspects as we humans view it. Inasmuch as it is natural, it is godly, but when it is material, it functions against human spirituality or godliness, whatever that may mean, as long as nature is regarded as the material world, as our senses perceive it. It is something we want to conquer. Nature here faces us as a kind of power, and wherever there is the notion of power, it is connected with that of conquest. And for man, therefore, nature is to be conquered and made use of for his own material welfare and comfort. Nature affords him a variety of opportunities to develop his powers, but at the same time, there is always on the part of man the tendency to exploit and abuse it for his selfish needs. The nature-man dichotomy issues, as I think, from the biblical account in which the Creator is said to have given mankind the power to dominate all creation. It is fundamentally due to this story that Western people talk so much about conquering nature. And when they invent a flying machine, they say that they've conquered the air. When they climb to the top of Mount Everest, they loudly announce that they have succeeded in conquering the mountain. This idea of conquest comes from the relationship between nature and man being regarded as that of power. And this relationship involves a state of mutual opposition and destruction. This power relationship also brings out the problem of rationality. Man is rational, whereas nature is brutal, and man strives to make nature amenable to his idea of rationality. Rationality is born with the rising of consciousness out of the primordial unconscious. Consciousness makes it possible for the human being to reflect upon his own doings and the events around him. And this reflection gives him the power to rise above mere naturalness and to bring it under his control. There is no discipline in nature because it operates blindly. Discipline, which is something human and artificial, and to that extent works for bad as well as for good, belongs entirely to humankind. As long as he is capable of it, man trains himself for a definite purpose. Nature, on the other hand, is purposeless. And it is because of this purposelessness that nature, in one sense, is conquered by man, and in another sense, conquers man. For however purposeful man may be, he does not know, ultimately, whither he is going, and his pride has, after all, no substance whatever. So let us understand nature as something antithetical to what is ordinarily known as divine, as something irrational yet amenable to our mechanical, economic, utilitarian treatment, as something not human, not in possession of human feelings, and devoid of moral significance, as something which finally overpowers man, in spite of man's partial and temporary success. In short, nature is brutally factual, with no history objectively set before us, and to be regarded as commercially exploitable, but finally swallowing us all in the purposelessness of the unknown. Concretely speaking, nature consists of mountains and rivers, grass and trees, stones and earth, suns, moons and stars, birds and animals. Nature is all that constitutes what is commonly known as man's objective world. When nature is seen in this light, it may seem well defined, but nature has a great deal more to say to us. Nature is indeed an eternal problem, and when it is solved, we know not only nature but ourselves. The problem of nature. Nature is indeed an eternal problem, and when it is solved, we know not only nature but ourselves. The problem of nature is the problem of human life. And from the human point of view, anything that is not of human origin may be said to be of nature. But man is, after all, part of nature itself. First of all, man himself is not man-made, but nature-made, as much as anything we regard as of nature. If so, what is man-made? There is nothing in man that does not belong in nature. All things man-made must be considered nature-made and not man-made. If God created the world, he created man as part of it, and God did not create man as something separate from nature so that man can stand outside nature as a controlling power and have things man-made put against things nature-made. But as far as the biblical account is concerned, man was made in God's image, and nature was to be dominated by man. And this idea is the real beginning of human tragedy. I wish to ask if it is the right way of thinking, this idea of domination, for when the idea of power, which is domination, comes in, all kinds of struggles arise, and as this struggle is always ego-centered, its outcome is tragic. Nature, as we have seen, includes all created things. To think that these are all under human control is altogether illogical and cannot be consistently maintained. But Western people unconsciously follow this idea, and their moral attitude towards nature is thereby determined. Man, though made in God's image, has his own way of doing things, which is by no means God's way. And for this reason he was expelled from Eden. He is now partly God's and partly Satan's child. And what he does quite frequently contradicts the divine commands, and also sometimes his own self-interest. As to nature, it also acts against God, though it cannot be anything else but God's creation. Man is against God, nature is against God, and man and nature are against each other. If so, God's own likeness, man, God's own creation, nature, and God himself, all three are at war. But with our human way of thinking, God did not create the world just to see it revolt against himself and make it fight within itself. From another point of view, however, it is in the nature of things that as soon as there is a world of the many, there is conflict. When the world is once out of God's hand, he cannot control it. It is sure to revolt and fight in every possible way. So we have now nature against God, and man against nature and God. In biblical terms, nature is the flesh, lust of the flesh, sinful flesh, etc. And this brings the fight between nature and man to a more concrete and sensuous level. The human body, which is a mixture of God and nature, becomes a most bloody fighting arena for these two forces. And from these considerations, we can summarize the Western attitude toward nature thus. Nature is something hostile to man and drags him down when he is struggling to reach God. The temptation of nature, symbolized as the flesh, are often irresistible and make man exclaim, "The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." Number 2. While nature and God are warring against each other, nature and man are also at war, or rather, as commanded by God, man is always striving to exercise his dominating power over nature. 3. There's no way for man to approach nature in a conciliatory, friendly spirit. One works to destroy the other. There is nothing in nature that will help man in his spiritual advancement. 4. Nature is a material world, and the material world is meant for exploration and exploitation. 5. In another sense, the material world is brute fact, stands as the pour soi against the en soi. Intellect cannot do anything with it, but has to take it as it is and make the best of it. 6. The dichotomy of nature and man implies hostility, even an utter irreconcilability, and is therefore mutually destructive. 7. No idea seems to be present here which indicates or even suggests human participation in or identification with nature. To the Western mind, nature and man are separate. Man relies on nature for food and cannot help but being influenced by nature. He finds himself engaged in farming, hunting, fishing, etc., and each of these engagements contributes to his character, for nature cannot be conceived as a merely passive substance upon which man works. Nature is also power and energy. Nature reacts to human calls. When man is agreeable and in conformity with nature's way, it will cooperate with man and reveal to him all its secrets and even help him to understand himself. And each of us as a farmer or hunter or carpenter gets from nature what he looks for in it and assimilates it in his own field. And to this extent, nature remolds human character. To treat nature as something irrational and in opposition to human rationality is a purely Western idea, and sometimes we feel the proposition ought to be reversed. It is irrational of man to try to make nature obey his will, because nature has its own way of carrying on its work, which is not always man's way, and man has no right to impose his way upon nature. Nature, it is true, lacks consciousness. It is just the reed and not a thinking reed. Because of this lack of consciousness, it is regarded by man as brute fact, as something with no will and intelligence of its own. It knows of nothing but an absolute must, and permits no human interference except in its must way. It knows no favoritism and refuses to deviate from its course of inevitability. It is not accommodating. It is man who must accommodate himself to nature. Nature's must is absolute, and man must accept it. In this respect, nature has something of the divine will. And this is the reason I think why being natural or spontaneous has an alluring quality in it. When a child performs deeds which polite society would condemn as undignified or improper or even immoral, the offenses are not only condoned, but accepted as acts of innocent childlikeness. And there is something divine in being spontaneous and not being hampered by human conventionalities and their artificial hypocrisies. There is something direct and fresh in this lack of restraint by anything human, which suggests a divine freedom and creativity. Nature never deliberates. It acts directly out of its own heart, whatever this may mean. In this respect, nature is divine. Its irrationality transcends human doubts or ambiguities, and in our submitting to it, or rather accepting it, we transcend ourselves. This acceptance or transcendence is a human prerogative. We accept nature's irrationality or its must deliberately, quietly, and wholeheartedly. It is not a deed of blind and slavish submission to the inevitable. It is an active acceptance, a personal willingness with no thought of resistance. In this, there is no force implied, no resignation, but rather participation, assimilation, and perhaps, in some cases, even identification. Nature is sometimes treated by Western people as something already there, into which man comes and which he finds himself confronting with hostility because he feels he does not belong in it. He is conscious of a situation in which he is surrounded by all kinds of inert matter and brute fact. He does not know why he's there, nor does he realize what is coming to him. Endowed with consciousness, however, he thinks he can decide his future course, and he feels entirely responsible for his decision. He is lonely and helpless because nature is threatening and ready to swallow him down into its own maw. He is overawed and trembles, not knowing what is best to do. This is the position, according to some modern thinkers, when man encounters nature. Here is no room for God to enter, but the dichotomy of man and nature is still maintained and in a more acutely oppressive relationship. Nature is brute fact and has nothing in common with man. Man makes use of it economically with no sense of kinship with it, hence with no sense of gratitude or sympathetic affiliation. Nature is here an unknown quantity, unfriendly and ready to frustrate man's attempt to dominate it. Nature promises nothing but sheer emptiness. Whatever man may build upon it is doomed to destruction. It is for this reason that modern men are constantly assailed with feelings of fear, insecurity, and anxiety. There is, however, another way of considering nature and man. Inasmuch as nature stands before man as an unknown quantity and man comes to it with his consciousness from somewhere else than nature, nature and man cannot be friendly and sociable, for they have no way to communicate. They are strangers. But the very fact that man finds himself encountering nature demonstrates that the two are not unknown to each other. And to this extent, then, nature is already telling man something of itself, and man is to that extent understanding nature. Then man cannot be said to be entirely an outsider, but somehow stands in relation to nature, perhaps comes out of nature itself. Man must be, after all, an insider. Here there is room for Zen Buddhism to enter and to give its own views on the relationship of nature and man. While separating himself from nature, man is still a part of nature. For the fact of separation itself shows that man is dependent on nature, and we can therefore say this: nature produces man out of itself. Man cannot be outside of nature. He still has his being rooted in nature. Therefore, there cannot be any hostility between them. On the contrary, there must always be a friendly understanding between man and nature. Man came from nature in order to see nature in himself, and that is, nature came to itself in order to see itself in man. This is objective thinking, to say that man comes from nature and that man sees himself through nature, or that nature sees itself through man. There's another way of seeing into the situation. By shifting our position from objectivity to subjectivity. And this probing into subjectivity is probing into the very basis of nature as it is in itself. To turn to subjectivity means to turn from nature to man himself. Instead of considering man objectively in opposition to nature, our task is now to make man retreat, as it were, into himself and see what he finds in the depths of his being. The probing of nature thus becomes the problem of man. Who or what is man? A Zen master once asked a monk, "Do not think of good. Do not think of evil. When no thoughts arise, let me see your primary face." The monk answered, "I have nothing shapely to show you." This kind of mondo, which is question and answer, has taken place in Zen from its start in the Tang period, that is, in the 8th century. And to those who have never been initiated into the Zen way of treating the problem of nature or man, this question and answer will appear uncouth and not susceptible of rationalization. It is altogether out of the realm of discursive understanding. What does the primary face mean, you may ask? What has the face to do with the problem of man and his situation? And then what has one to do with good and evil and no thoughts arising? A few words may be needed before we can come to Zen. Generally speaking, Zen refuses to make use of abstract terms, to indulge in metaphysical speculations, or to involve itself in a series of questions and answers. Its discourse is always short, pithy, and right to the point. When words are found to be a roundabout way of communication, the Zen master may utter cuts without giving what is ordinarily considered a rational or an intelligible reply. And in the same way, when told that he looks like a dog, he will not get excited and make an angry retort. Instead, he may simply cry, "Bow wow," and pass on. As to the use of a stick, there is one master noted for its liberal application. Tokusan used to say, "When you say yes, you get 30 blows of my stick. And when you say no, you get 30 blows of my stick just the same." The Zen monks generally carry a long staff in traveling from one monastery to another along the mountain path. And the stick in Zen has been a very expressive means of communication. Zen thus avoids as much as possible the use of a medium, especially intellectual and conceptual, known as language. Therefore, we have, first of all, a reference to good and evil. And this has nothing to do with our own sense of moral evaluation and simply refers to our dualistic habit of thinking. Good and evil can be anything, black and white, yes and no, affirmation and negation, creator and created, heaven and hell, etc. When we are told not to think of them, it means to transcend all forms of dichotomy and to enter into the realm of the absolute, where no thought prevails. The question, therefore, proposed by the Zen master here concerns the absolute and is not one of morality or psychology. What does Zen mean by asking a man to show his primary face? When I tell you that this is the innermost man or self in itself, or being as it is, you will be surprised and declare, "What an odd language Zen people use." But this oddity partly characterizes the Chinese language as well as Zen. The primary face is possessed by every one of us. According to Zen, it is not only physical, but at once physical and metaphysical, material and spiritual, gross and subtle, concrete and abstract. The Zen master wants to see this kind of face presented to him by his monk. In one important sense, this face must go through the baptism of do not think of good, do not think of evil, and of have no thoughts whatever. For the face we have on the surface of our relative psychological way of thinking is not the primary face demanded by the master. But here is another difficulty. The answer given by the monk, "I have nothing shapely to show you." This means, "I am sorry, master, that my primary face is not very presentable and not worthy of your regard." The monk seems to be talking about his own face, which is recognizable by every Tom, Dick, and Harry. Is this face really the primary face? If so, Zen does not seem to have anything miraculous about it. What then is all this fuss about, going beyond the duality of our thinking? The Zen master's answer to such questions will be, this is on the plane of pure subjectivity and a matter of personal determination. In fact, all Zen mondo come out of this subjectivity experience. Here is another mondo. Monk, before my parents gave birth to me, where is my nose, or face, or self? Master, when you are already born of your parents, where are you? Here the monk has the nose instead of the face. But this does not mean any difference as far as Zen is concerned. The Chinese masters always prefer to be concrete. Instead of talking about being or reason or reality, they talk about stones, flowers, clouds, or birds. To give another example, when a Zen master was walking with his monk attendant, he happened to notice a bird flying and asked the monk, "What bird is that?" The monk answered, "It is gone already." The master turned toward the monk and, taking hold of his nose, gave it a twist. The monk cried in pain, "Oh, oh!" The master remarked, "It is still there." We notice here, too, the nose is playing an important role in the discussion of being. No high-flown abstract terminology here, but ordinary plain talking on the plane of our daily experience. The primary face, the painful nose, the flying bird, and in fact any sensuous object that is seen or heard turns into the subject of the deepest metaphysical significance in the hands of the Zen masters. In the mondo, the monk wants to know where his nose is before he was born of his parents, or even before this earth or nature came into being. And this exactly corresponds to Christ's statement, "Before Abraham was, I am." The nose is Christ, and the monk is desirous of interviewing Christ himself, who is even before the birth of Abraham. Western people will never dare to ask such questions. They would think it sacrilegious, that is, to intrude on ground which is sacrosanct to all Christians or God-fearing minds. And they are too dualistic-minded and unable to think of going beyond tradition and history. The master's answer is also significant. He ignores time's sequence in which birth and death takes place with all other events which make up human history. He pays no attention to the serialism of time. When the monk asks about his nose before his coming into this world of sense and intellect, the master retorts by referring to the monk's actual presence, to his as he is-ness. From the relative point of view, this answer is no answer. It does not locate the monk's nose, but asks the counter question regarding himself as he stands before the master, perhaps in a shabby monkish robe and with a not very smoothly shaven face and a not very shapely nose. The point that I'm trying to make is that Zen starts where time has not come to itself. That is to say, where timelessness has not negated itself so as to have a dichotomy of subject, object, man, nature, God, world. This is the abode of what I call pure subjectivity. Zen is here and wants us to be here too. In terms of nature, Zen is where one of the masters remarked, "When I began to study Zen, mountains were mountains. When I thought I understood Zen, mountains were not mountains. But when I came to full knowledge of Zen, mountains were again mountains." When the mountains are seen as not standing against me, when they are dissolved into the oneness of things, they are not mountains. They cease to exist as objects of nature. When they are seen as standing against me, as separate from me, as something unfriendly to me, they are not mountains either. The mountains are really mountains when they are assimilated into my being, and I am absorbed in them. As long as nature is something differentiated from me, and is displayed before me as if it were an unknown quantity and a mere brute fact, nature cannot be said even to be unfriendly or actively hostile. On the other hand, nature becomes part of my being as soon as it is recognized as nature, as pour soi. It can never remain as something strange and altogether unrelated to me. I am in nature, and nature is in me. Not mere participation in each other, but a fundamental identity between the two. Hence the mountains are mountains and the rivers are rivers, and they are there before me. And the reason I can see the mountains and the waters as waters is because I am in them and they are in me. That is, tattvam asi. If not for this identity, there would be no nature as pour soi. The primary face or my nose is to be taken hold of here and nowhere else. Identity belongs in spatial terminology. In terms of time, it is timeless, but mere timelessness does not mean anything. When nature is seen as confronting me, there is already time, and timelessness now turns itself into time. But time serialism makes sense only when it goes on in the field of timelessness, which is the Buddhist conception of sunyata, or emptiness. In this sunyata, the mountains are mere mountains, and I see them as such, and they see me as such. Me seeing them is their seeing me. It is then that sunyata becomes tathata, suchness. Tathata is sunyata, and sunyata is tathata. When we come to this stage of thinking, pure subjectivity is pure objectivity. The en soi is the pour soi, whereas there is perfect identity of man and nature, of God and nature, of the one and the many. But the identity does not imply the annihilation of one at the cost of the other. The mountains do not vanish, they stand before me. I have not absorbed them, nor have they wiped me out of the scene. The dichotomy is there, which is suchness, and this suchness, tathata, in all its suchness, is emptiness, sunyata itself. The mountains are mountains, and yet not mountains. I am I, and you are you, and yet I am you, and you are I. Nature as a world of manyness is not ignored, and man, as a subject facing the many, remains conscious. and man as a subject facing the many remains conscious of himself. Existentialism, pragmatism, and Zen. Zen is a school of Buddhism and has developed from the enlightenment experience of Sakyamuni. This experience is best expressed by the doctrine of sunyata, which means emptiness. Sunyata is a most difficult term for which to find an equivalent in English, and I think it is best to leave the original untranslated, trying in the meantime to make its significance as clear as possible. First, I must state that sunyata is not a negative term, as might be suggested, when it is translated as emptiness or void. It is a positive concept with a definite connotation, but it ought not to be considered an outcome of abstraction or generalization, for it is not a postulated idea. It is what makes the existence of anything possible, but it is not to be conceived imminently as if it lay hidden in or under every existence as an independent entity. A world of relatives is set on and in sunyata. Sunyata envelops, as it were, the whole world, and yet is in every object existing in the world. The doctrine of sunyata is neither an immanentism nor a transcendentalism. If we can say so, it is both. If it is declared that immanentism and transcendentalism contradict each other, sunyata is this contradiction itself. A contradiction implies two terms which are set against each other. Sunyata is absolutely one, hence there is no contradiction in it. The contradiction is felt only when we are out of sunyata. As long as we live in it, there is no contradiction, and this is where Zen wants us to be. With Zen, therefore, sunyata is to be experienced and not conceptualized. To experience means to become aware of, but not in the way in which we become aware of the world of sense and intellect. In the latter case, we always have a subject that is aware of something, and an object of which the subject is aware. And for the world of sense and intellect is a dichotomous world of subject and object. To be aware of sunyata, according to Zen, we have to transcend this dichotomous world in such a way as not to be outside it. Sunyata is to be experienced in a unique way. And this unique way consists in sunyata's remaining in itself, yet making itself an object of experience to itself. And this means dividing itself and yet holding itself together. In the case of an ordinary experience, this is impossible, because in the world of ordinary experience, every experience is conceptualized, since this world is really our intellectual reconstruction, and not really as it is in itself, not in its suchness, as Buddhist philosophers would say. Sunyata is experienced only when it is both subject and object. The philosopher's way is to start first from the experience and logic of a reconstructed world. And failing to recognize this fact, he proceeds to apply his logic to the experience of sunyata. And this necessitates that sunyata step out into this world, which means destroying sunyata. The more thoroughly logicized, the more thoroughly is sunyata destroyed. The proper way to study sunyata is to experience it, to become aware of it, in the only way sunyata can be approached. That is to say, the philosopher has to purge every residue of what the mind has accumulated by assiduously applying himself to the work of intellection. He has to reverse his process of reasoning, realizing that this is a weapon that is quite efficient in dealing with things of this world, of relatives, but that when we want to get down into the very bedrock of reality, which is sunyata, we must appeal to another method, and there is no other method than that of casting away this intellectual weapon, and in all nakedness, plunging right into sunyata itself. As I said before, sunyata is what makes this world possible. This being so, when we apply the method to the realization of sunyata, which we use to know this world, to know things of and in this world, we are trying to force the method to work where it is not useful and where it does not yield fruit. Knowing and seeing sunyata is sunyata knowing and seeing itself. There is no outside knower or spectator. It is its own knower and seer. In this respect, sunyata is Atman, master of itself, is not at all conditioned by anything outside. And here's the question. If it is sunyata itself that sees and knows itself, how can we humans talk about it? We are relatively determined. All our knowledge is conditioned, and so how can this relatively conditioned being come to the experience of sunyata? The answer is, we are sunyata. We can talk of sunyata only because we are it. If this were not the case, there would be no philosophy in this world. It is entirely due to sunyata that we can reason, although reasoning itself cannot lead us to sunyata. Reasoning comes out of sunyata. Sunyata is in it. Every step of reasoning leaves the mark of sunyata. It is sunyata that urges us to go beyond reasoning while we are all the time engaged in reasoning. Sunyata wants to see itself, to know itself, and it is this want on the part of sunyata that leads to reasoning. And reason, not knowing this cause of its own activity, defeats itself in spite of its ambitious claim for omniscience. Reasoning defeats itself, finds itself altogether futile in its attempt to reach sunyata, because reasoning, instead of trying to see sunyata itself in the process of reasoning, strives to reach sunyata as the goal of reasoning. That is, when all the reasoning comes to an end, when we, the reasoners, realize that sunyata is working. In reasoning itself, that reasoning is no other than sunyata in disguise. We know sunyata, we see sunyata, and this is sunyata knowing and seeing itself. And so we can say that when sunyata knows itself, it is not sunyata, but we ourselves as sunyata. Sunyata knows itself through us because we are sunyata. When sunyata is awakened to itself or becomes aware of itself, which is knowing and seeing itself, we have another name for it. Sunyata is tathata, suchness. There is nothing negative in the concept of tathata. Tathata is the viewing of things as they are. It is an affirmation through and through. I see a tree, and I state that it is a tree. I hear a bird sing, and I say that a bird sings. A spade is a spade, and a mountain is a mountain. The fowls of the air fly, and the flowers of the field bloom. These are statements of tathata. When a Zen master was asked, "What is everyday thought?" he said, "I sleep when I am tired. I eat when I am hungry." This everyday thought is declared to be the ultimate Tao, the highest teaching of Buddhist philosophy. If sunyata denies or rejects everything, tathata accepts and upholds everything. The two concepts may be considered as opposing each other, but it is the Buddhist idea that they are not contradictory. And that is, from our relativistic point of view, that they seem so. In truth, tathata is sunyata and sunyata is tathata. Things are tathata because of their being sunyata. A Buddhist philosopher declares, a mountain is a mountain and water is water before a sunyata experience takes place. But after it, a mountain is not a mountain and water is not water. But again, when the experience deepens, a mountain is a mountain and water is water. This requires a supplementary remark. When the philosopher says that with the experience of sunyata, a mountain ceases to be a mountain and water to be water, this experience must be regarded as not quite reaching its deepest depths. It is still on the level of intellection. There is something of a conceptualization. It is not thoroughly purged of all the dregs. When sunyata is really sunyata, it becomes identical with tathata. The tathata concept is what makes Zen approach pragmatism and existentialism. They all accept experience as the basis of their theorization, and this experience is closely attached to the world of relativities. Zen, however, is different in a most significant way from pragmatism. Whereas pragmatism appeals to the practical usefulness of truth, that is, the purposefulness of our action, Zen emphasizes the purposelessness of work, or being detached from teleological consciousness, or as Zen characteristically expresses it, not leaving any trace behind as one lives one's life. It is in this spirit that Hui Neng Yino in Japanese, the sixth patriarch and the originator of Chinese Zen, strongly insisted on the identity or simultaneity of dhyana and prana. When Hui Neng said to have had his insight into the truth of Zen while listening to the Diamond Sutra, we can trace the same idea lurking in the phrase which contributed to his enlightenment, namely, to awaken the mind while abiding nowhere. And this means nothing less or more than a non-teleological interpretation of life. Teleology is a term belonging to a world of time, relativity, causality, morality, and so on, while Zen lives beyond all these limitations. As long as the lilies of the field and the fowls of the air live, just to demonstrate the glory of the divine life, they are living a purposeless life. So are human beings. When we live not trying to add 1 cubit to our stature, or without worrying about the morrow as to what to wear, what to eat, but letting the evil of the day take care of itself, is not this kind of life just as glorious as that of the fowls or of the lilies? Will not this kind of life be the life God wanted us to live, that is, free from all teleological vexations and humanly intentional complexities? Time and teleology are interwoven, and Zen transcends time and therefore teleology also. So we read in the Dhammapada, verse 385, for whom there exists neither the hither nor the farther shore, nor both the hither and the farther shore, he who is undistressed and unbound, him I call a Brahman. Zen diverges from existentialism in this. There are various brands of existentialism, but they seem to agree in holding that finite man is infinitely removed from God. That the sea of possibilities opening ahead is frightening. They mean freedom, and unlimited freedom means unbearable responsibility. To these thoughts, Zen is a stranger, because for Zen, the finite is infinite. Time is eternity. Man is not separated from God. Before Abraham was, I am. Furthermore, Zen does not find anything frightening in infinite possibilities, unlimited freedom, never-ending responsibilities. Zen moves along with infinite possibilities. Zen enjoys unlimited freedom because Zen is freedom itself. However unending and unbearable responsibility may be, Zen bears it as if not bearing it at all. In Christian terminology, this means that my responsibility is shifted to God's shoulder, that not my will, but thy will be done. And this is Zen's attitude toward moral responsibility. This is not shunning it. Of course, Zen is ready to bear it to its full extent, if necessary, to sacrifice life itself. But the point is that Zen practices the virtue of dana, giving, the first of the 6 paramitas, on the plane of tathata, as if cutting the spring breeze in the midst of a lightning flash. Kierkegaard was somewhat neurotic and morbid when he dilated on fear. He was obsessed with the feeling because he had an abnormal sense of his separation from God, which prevented a full understanding of the meaning of the freedom which issues from the experience of tathata. The existentialist generally interprets freedom on the plane of relativity, where there is no freedom in its highest sense. Freedom can be predicated only of tathata and its experience. The existentialist looks into the abyss of tathata and trembles and is seized with inexpressible fear. Zen would tell him, why not plunge right into the abyss and see what is there? The idea of individualism fatally holds him back from throwing himself into the devil's maw. To Zen, time and eternity are one. This is open to misinterpretation, as most people interpret Zen as annihilating time and putting in its place eternity, which to them means a state of absolute quietness or doing nothingness. They forget that if time is eternity, eternity is time. According to Zen, Zen has never espoused the cause of doing nothingness. Eternity is our everyday experience in this world of sense and intellect. For there is no eternity outside this time-conditionedness. Eternity is possible only in the midst of birth and death, in the midst of time process. Now, I raise a finger. This is in time, and eternity is seen dancing at the tip of it. When this is translated into terms of space, the one finger contains in it the 3,000 chiliocosms. This is not symbolism. To Zen, it is an actual experience. In one sense, Zen may be regarded as momentalistic, but not as this is commonly understood. Zen has eternity in momentarism, whereas momentarism is devoid of eternity. And with momentalists, each fleeting moment is only fleeting and does not carry eternity along with it. Momentalists are therefore irresponsible in a bad sense. They are anti-moral. They are not at all free, not masters of themselves, for they are controlled by the consciousness of momentariness. Zen designates this state of mind as abiding, as having a fixed abiding place. One who has an abiding place is a prisoner, just like a man tied to a post or hedged around with fences. A free Zen man has no such abode anywhere. He lives in a circle whose circumference has no limits. Therefore, wherever he is always at the center of reality. He is reality itself. A momentalist life has no meaning whatever. It is like animal life or plant life. Life is there to be sure, but there is no meaning to it. Why? Because the momentalist is not conscious of eternity while living in time. Each moment is to him just that, and no more. And like the dog romping about in the yard, he enjoys it. His joy is animalistic and has no value whatsoever. Momentarism does not know what is meant by the absolute present. Zen lives in this, and therefore is tathata conscious. In the Diamond Sutra we read, "The past mind is unattainable, the future mind is unattainable, the present mind is unattainable." And this is a significant statement. The idea is that consciousness is in time. It operates in time. It is time itself. And that consciousness is a locus of what is known in Buddhist philosophy as ksana, nien in Chinese and nen in Japanese. I venture to translate kasana as consciousness unit. For consciousness is serially tracing these units. In terms of time, a consciousness unit is the shortest possible division of time. But as we cannot fix any limit to time division, we can say that a consciousness unit is only theoretically assumed. Ekaksana, that is the idea of such an ultimate unit, is to all intents and purposes unattainable. And this is what is meant by the statement from the Diamond Sutra. And ekaksana is unattainable. And so is the absolute present, and ekaksana is unattainable, and so is the absolute present. And an ekaksana is an absolute present, eternal now. Zen is thus said to be realized in an ekaksana. Every moment of consciousness is an ekaksana, and yet no ekaksana is to be picked out of it and pointed out as such. An ekaksana means the bursting of time out of eternity. It is the awakening of consciousness out of the darkest recesses of the unconscious. And at the awakening of the ekaksana, the unconscious comes to itself, or we can say that eternity then cuts into time. And therefore the unconscious is known only through consciousness, and eternity through time. There is no eternity as such. It is always to be in time process. There is no so-called unconscious which does not come along with consciousness. Ekaksana is often designated as aksana. Aksana means no ksana. No ksana, however, does not mean the effacement of consciousness. It is in and with consciousness. It is an ekaksana, and yet unattainable as such. No ksana has a positive connotation as eternity. The main trouble with the human mind is that while it is capable of creating concepts in order to interpret reality, it hypostatizes them and treats them as if they were real things. Not only that, the mind regards its self-constructed concepts as laws externally opposed upon reality, which has to obey them in order to unfold itself. And this attitude or assumption on the part of the intellect helps the mind to handle nature for its own purposes, but the mind altogether misses the inner workings of life, and consequently is utterly unable to understand it. This is the reason we have to halt at contradictions and are at a loss as how to proceed. In the Dhammapada 369, we have, "Empty this boat, O bhikkhu. Emptied by you, it will move swiftly, cutting out lust and hatred to nibbana. You will thereby go." Emptying this boat means emptying our mind of all the concepts we have constructed to handle reality intellectually and to make it yield the best results for our practical life. The sciences have thus developed, mechanical appliances have achieved wonderful results, and our so-called standard of living has attained unprecedented heights. But as to the spiritualization of life, or a deeper insight into its significance, I am afraid we have not made much advance. We are not making our lifeboat move more swiftly than we did in the past. Lust and hatred, which are also contents of the boat, are increasing and amassing and are not cut at all. For intellectualization is helpless to get the boat rid of lust, hatred, and the like. The doctrine of sunyata, it is to be remembered, does not mean emptying the boat of reality, for reality itself is sunyata, and there is nothing to empty. Sunyata is a positive conception, and it is in this positiveness that sunyata is identified with tathata. Zen views reality as tathata, and because of this tathata view of reality, Zen is said to be radical empiricism. Zen is empiric because it appeals to prana intuition as the means of taking hold of reality itself without any roundabout methodology. Zen empiricism is radical because prana intuition lies underneath all forms of intuition and intellection, and beyond prana intuition, there is nothing which makes us come into direct contact with reality. Zen is often charged with aloofness, solitariness, and being detached from the masses. To a certain extent, this is true. The Zen man is sometimes found to be living in the rarefied atmosphere of intellectual superiority. He is apt to be standing aloof from society and from being useful to the community where he belongs. But the fact is that Zen has its conative or affective aspect along with its noeticism. The Enlightenment experience is not devoid of the great compassionate heart, but so far historical circumstances have prevented its asserting itself in this direction. Zen is socially minded as much as any other religion, but this has been manifested or demonstrated more individualistically owing to its emphasis upon individual experience. As to serving others in social ways, Zen has had its own way of doing it. And the following examples will illustrate this. Since Adam was ordered in the beginning of things, in the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread till thou return unto the ground, we are all to work hard to remove thorns and thistles from the cursed ground in order to raise our staff of life and be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it. This was especially the case in China, where Zen first developed in the form we have it now. The Chinese are great agricultural people and work hard at it, so it was natural for the Zen masters to refer constantly to farming and things connected with farming. The only thing that makes Buddhists look rather idle or backward in so-called social service work is the fact that Eastern people, among whom Buddhism flourishes, are not very good at organization. They are just as charitably disposed as any religious people and ready to put their teachings into practice, but they are not accustomed to carry on their philanthropic undertakings in a systematic way. Rather, they have been encouraged to go on with their work quietly, privately, individually, and without letting others know what they are doing. And when we read the history of Buddhism in regard to this phase of its activities, we notice how Buddhists labored for the welfare and edification of the masses. The saddest thing is that most of us are ignorant, benighted, and utterly egocentric, in spite of all the churches, temples, synagogues, mosques, and other institutions of education, secular and spiritual. And this is what makes the enlightened ones feel sometimes despondent and cheerless, traces of which we can detect in all our saintly figures. As long as man is what he is, he cannot remain insensible to any happenings that may take place in his surroundings. His nerves are racked to the utmost when he observes all the human pains, tortures, and miseries unspeakable after an atomic bomb bursts in the midst of a thickly populated city. And the worst thing is that one is utterly helpless in the face of these sufferings. The only remedy one could have, if it is granted, is the gospel of insensibility. How inhuman! But when I reflect that all such things are desperately beyond our individual control, although I am inclined to think that all our group activities are the accumulations of individual thought and action, I cannot help being in deep sympathy with the biblical writer who makes God soliloquize in this wise. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man, whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping things and the fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them. Is God now in earnest engaged in the gigantic task of effacing man from the earth? Apparently he is. If so, inasmuch as man is man, he must have a philosophy to cope with the situation. Can Zen offer this?